45-degree cut at the bottom because you get more surface area. But the reality is that's just like one side of a six-sided die. If you cut the bottom off, that's side one. So the roots start at the edges of the 45-degree angle and they come down. And just like we saw in that room, you end up with a couple of roots that come down and then they bush out. You're looking for lots of roots that come off the plant. So the trick about turbo cloner is you end up with roots 2 inches up the shaft and all the way around. That's not just the one side of the die. That's 4 more sides. That's 400% increase. So you're looking for more roots because roots are fruits. You can get the same results from any of the starter plugs, from Clone-X or the Root Rights. You can get the same results, but you just wait an extra couple of weeks. This turbo cloner speeds the process up, and it forms the roots buds quicker, and then you get the actual roots that come down. But the 2 inches up all the way around is like one of those things I can't express to you how valuable it is. And then you can take it out of here and go in hydro or media or cocoa or soil, wherever you want to go. It's pretty versatile. But the roots are always the thing. And this is a cloth pot. Like, here's one from Smart Pot. The neat thing about a cloth pot is it gets air through the material. So when the root runs up against it, the root tip dies. Smart Pot. You end up with a dead root tip, and when the root tip dies, all those individual hairs become roots of their own. And that's what you're looking for. It's a sudden and exponential growth increase in roots. You cut the one off, you pinch the one, and all the side root hairs become roots on their own. They run into the edge of the pot, those root tips die, and then all those root hairs become roots. And suddenly, you go from one of those plants in their display room that has a couple of dangles and a big bunch to a big bunch attached to the roots, to the stem itself. And that's what you're looking for. It's a less precarious situation. It's greater redundancy and a much bigger surface area. More root, more fruit, and that's like the name of the game, right? Flowers are just the advertising. So it's all about roots. All right. Okay. Rotation's a big deal. A 1 light rotation, a 2 light rotation, a 3 light rotation, you have to ask yourself what you're trying to accomplish. If you've got a 1 light rotation, you're going to grow a plant for 30 days, you're going to flower it for 60 days, and you're only going to get a harvest every 90 days. But that may be enough for you. If a harvest every 90 days works, that's great. You get yourself a 600 watt or a 1,000 watt light, depending on how much you want to yield, and you go from there. But when you're done flowering, you didn't grow anything to replace it with. So the harvest is kind of over and you have to start over again. Whereas in a 2 light rotation, it's a little different. You're always growing something and you're always flowering something. So as soon as your harvest comes down, you have more plants and veg that you can put under the flower light. The bonus is, if you have a 600 watt flower, you have a 400 watt veg, you're still at 1,000 lights, but only for a couple 1,000 watts, but only for a couple of hours a day while both lights are on. A 2 light rotation is, for the most part, the most efficient. You can get more, but you lose a little bit of the efficiency, and this is now a 3 light rotation, where you have 1 light in veg, 2 lights in flower, and a 30-day stagger. You still get the same yield as this rotation if you have the same light, but you get it every 30 days. You could do both lights at the same time, both flower lights, but then all of your product comes in at the same time, and sometimes you don't want that much product on the market all at once. You want to stagger it 30 days apart. So you stagger the lights. You have 1 veg and 2 flowers. You'll start this garden in January, you'll start this garden in February. When this garden comes down in March, you'll start it again. When this garden comes down in April, you'll start it again just by taking the plants out of veg. So there's this math that comes with rotations of how often you get how much. I talk about light schedules, and you were saying that you used to grow 24 hours in veg or 18 on, 6 off?
18 on, 6 off.
Okay, 18 on, 6 off is the way to go because plants do stuff in their sleep. They convert light into sugar all day, but in their sleep they take the sugar from the leaves and transport it down to the roots. So if you go in, if you got 24 hours of light in veg and you go into flower, the transition time increases because the plant has to grow more roots. The sign of a root problem when you go into flower is about 3 weeks into flower, the plant yellows from the bottom up and dies. She can't support the root. And usually you get that from either 24 hours of veg and you just don't have enough root, or you are overwatering rotted the root hairs, the plant can't absorb the nutrients, and as she doubles into flower, she yellows from the bottom up and dies. So if somebody comes into my store and they're like, I'm in week 2 or 3 flower, everything's kind of yellowing up from the bottom, you know, I have some news I have to tell you, sir. I'm afraid to inform you that your plants are going to be dead within a week. And there's no way to recover from it because you don't have any roots and now you're deep into flower. So the root part and the scheduling is pretty good. Cuttings like this get 24 hours of light. They're not trying to grow. You're just waiting for them. There's no roots for them to produce. You're just waiting for them to produce those roots so you can start them on an 18-on, 6-off veg cycle. Then 12-12 for flower, and that's what triggers the cycle. But that 24-hour veg is something that I run into a lot of times, and it impacts your flower section. It impacts your flower results. So I try to get you guys to veg with on an 18-6 schedule, so you don't have as much time transitioning into flower, and it works much better that way. It's just a math game.
I have a question. You
Yes.
were talking about cuttings earlier. I had about 4 mom plants for about 5 years that I cut off of. Is there a certain time limit for that, or just as long as they're healthy, they're good, right?
Every cell on a plant's pretty much a stem cell. You can root a leaf. It can't grow anywhere without a growth shoot. But any cell on a plant can be converted into any other cell. And you think about it, humans have been passing their genes down for what, 10, 20,000 years. And we've gotten better. And the same thing with plants. You can take a cutting from a cutting, from a cutting, from a cutting, ad infinitum. The plant's not going to change into, you're not going to get an orange tree from an apple. And as long as you've grown a healthy plant, usually what happens is it outgrows the space. And then you just replace her with one of her cuttings.
Yeah. Oh, so you can take a cutting of a cutting of a cutting of a cutting. And
Forever.
It's not like.
I mean, what are we talking about?
It's like digital, not.
Yes,
not
right, not analog. You
Not
don't
analog.
lose something with each copy. That's right, because genetically it's genetic.
Wow.
Otherwise, there would
Never
come
that.
this point where
I was-
what would happen? You get a mutant plant. And what would be the sign of
Makes
not
sense.
being able to take a cutting from a cutting? So you would have to. What happens? Does it hermaphrodite? Does it grow nodes this far apart or this close together? Does it? So there aren't any signs and symptoms. Really, if you take 2 plants and you make a seed and you grow another plant, essentially it's a copy of the previous plants. If you just take the same plant, it's just the same cells going on. If you have a plant that flowers automatically and you take cuttings from her, an autoflower, the cutting will flower. The cutting is on the same time as an autoflower, but on an indeterminate, when it flowers based on a season or something like that, or a trigger like 12-12, the plants, the veg plants are always the same. And a cutting from a cutting from a cutting, as long as you want. Usually you'll see, like in the hydroponic stores, they'll grow tomatoes plant, and they get big, and then the stalks get real thick, and then they get real sharp, and they get dangerous, and that's when you end up replacing them, when they outgrow the light. But there's no time limit on a cutting. There's no loss in potency. There's no alterations. If you took 24 cuttings and you grew them all into plants, and there was a problem with one of the cuttings, you would see it in that plant. And you would not take a cutting from that plant, or you would perpetuate the problem. So if you're going to replace a mother with another plant, just replace it with a healthy plant. And you know that plant looks and acts just like this plant. I hear it all the time. But the reality is, the guys who say that aren't growers, because the guys who are growing, and they just don't give a fuck. And they just take their cuttings, they replace their mothers. Maybe you'll get a new strain and learn something new. But you never run out of a cutting from a cutting from a cutting. It just, genetically, it doesn't work like that. It would express itself, you would be able to see it, and you just wouldn't replace the mother with that one plant. You've heard that, right? Take cuttings from cuttings is a problem?
Oh, the genetic thing and all
Yeah.
that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, nonsense. Hogwash. It's cloning. That's all we're talking about. The genetics that are in that plant are in that branch, and every cell in a plant's the same cell, so you can't.
Kind of no getting around it.
Yeah, there's just no getting around it.
Yeah.
And there's so much myth and hype and taboo
Right.
because so many people fail in indoor gardening.
Yeah.
And they all have their reasons why they fail. pH lockout doesn't exist. pH lockout, you mentioned it, but pH lockout doesn't exist. pH lockout describes a condition where you've rotted the root hairs. So if you have a root on a plant, you have the hairs at the bottom. The hairs absorb nutrients. The shaft absorbs water. Together they regulate how much salt the plant uptakes. if you try to drink ocean water, you know, a couple gallons of ocean water, you'll be dead by tonight. You try to drink 4 gallons of tap water, you'll be dead by tonight. We're talking about a salt balance inside the plant and outside the plant, and osmotic pressure, like an RO machine, but the opposite of, you know, you have to match the salt inside the plant and outside the plant. All the nutrients you see here are salt. You know what I mean? Mother plant, A and B, all salt. I always ask you guys, if a plant's yellow, what does it want? If the plant yellows, you know.
If it yellows, it wants nitrogen.
Nitrogen. But you didn't say can of nitrogen, you didn't say Botanicare nitrogen, GH nitrogen, Fox Farm nitrogen, mother plant nitrogen, advanced nitrogen. It's nitrogen. You said nitrogen. That's what the plant wants. If it's purple, she wants MAG. If the leaf tip pulls to one side, she wants calcium. And so she wants what she wants, but there's no name attached to it. If you look at the periodic table of elements, it's nitrogen, man. Now, that said, if you're good and you're getting what you're supposed to time after time after time, and you switch nutrients, you might find a nutrient that works better for what you're doing. Absolutely. But in terms of the average grower and the average yield, it doesn't matter which nitrogen you give it from which manufacturer, because N is N. You can run into a problem. Some stuff has like N2. And if you get too much nitrogen, you'll see that your tips get soft and they fall over. And if you try to take a cutting from that, it continues to fall over the next 24 hours when you separate it from the plant. So, you know, that's why they say woodsy cuttings are kind of good. But in terms of what the plant wants, it's nitrogen. So all these nutrients work. In fact, in my store, it's the #1 selling bottle in my store, because CalMag is the #1 problem in a healthy garden. If your plants are growing fast, magnesium converts light into sugar and gets used up in the process. Think of it like think of magnesium like fuel for your car. You don't just get to fill up your car once. You continue to have to fill up your car as you use up the energy. So magnesium is the central molecule in a chlorophyll ion. Start to finish, the plant wants MAG. Up until about the 4th week of flower, she'll want calcium, and then she'll want sulfur after that. But the plant wants MAG, and it works like this. MAG is a 200. If you add 2 to Pure Blend, which is a 235, essentially you get a 435. A 435 is a grow nutrient, more nitrogen, or something close to a nutrient. You could add more of this and get a 535, a 63, 735, whatever it is. You can continue to add nitrogen to a flower nutrient, and now you have a grow nutrient because there's more nitrogen than PK. Essentially, that's what makes a grow nutrient, that's what separates a flower nutrient from a grow nutrient. So here's a grow diamond, and this is in the books that I give you guys. The top half is grow, the bottom half is flower. What differentiates the two? A big N on top and big PK at the bottom. Because fruiting flowers want PK. That's what they build their flowers and roots from. Growing plants want N. That's why aquaponic works with some plants and not others, because there's a lot of N in aquaponics. So you want leafy plants, not fruiting plants. So here in this grow diamond, you can see veg is all about the N, flowers about the PK. If you continue to add N to PK till you have more N than PK, you get a grow nutrient. So these things are interchangeable. Does it say flower? Yes. Can you make it a grow nutrient? Yes. Can you take a grow nutrient and make a flower nutrient out of it? Yes. Add PK. Add PK till it's higher than the N. The important thing to know about magnesium, though, and this is where we started with this, the important thing to know about magnesium, I tell you guys there's only 5 problems in our world. Too much light, too much water, too many nutrients, bugs, and when everything is going good, not enough magnesium, which shows as purple stems, purple petioles, the leaf tips will cup up, the whole leaf will fold to try to reduce its exposure to the sun because it can't convert light into sugar because you run out of MAG. So you'll get a plant that's light green that's growing quick, and it'll turn dark green and dark green as you give it the same MAG and as she gets bigger. You can tell problems by holding a leaf up to the light. You can see if you have a spider mite bite, if you've got yellowing of a leaf. There's a lot of things that are obvious when you hold a leaf and try to look at it through the light. So you want MAG the whole way, because MAG is the central molecule in the chlorophyll ion. You only want calcium, like CalMag like this, up till the flowers are full size. and then you'll switch to mag sulfur, which is the sweet product, because that's got more sulfur, and sulfur is the ripening agent. That's why people add molasses. It has sugar and sulfur in it as a preservative. So this is the mag thing, but realistically, there's only a couple of problems that growers run into, and the number one problem in a healthy garden is not enough mag, because you're converting light into sugar at a faster rate, and you run out of mag. I show you guys how to measure ppm. Like literally, you can figure it out week by week if we answer a couple of questions. So yield's based on light. It's not based on nutrients. If it was based on nutrients, you wouldn't buy the most expensive, hottest thing in your garden that you have to pay to cool. If you could do this and grow with just nutrients, why would you ever buy a light? So once we start with the photosynthesis equation, it works like this. Using light for energy. Plants take water and CO2 and combine it into sugar and oxygen. That's what plants do. Nowhere in that equation do nutrients exist. It's just not how it works. You go to a gym to get buff, and you merely eat the amount of food to support that level of exercise. So nutrients are the calories that support exercise. Exercise is the light. If you have a 400 watt light, you'll get 8 flowers every 60 days. If you have a 600 watt light, you can expect 16 flowers every 60 days. And if you have a 1,000 watt light, you can expect 24 flowers. 1,000 gets you 3 times what a 400 will get you. A 600 gets you twice what a 400 will get you. And there's a mathematical curve that follows that, and it says that the 600 watt light is the most efficient light that you can grow with. It's 50% more electricity than a 400 watt, but you get twice the yield from it. 1,000 isn't the same thing. If you double a 600, if you go from 6 to 1,000, it's 75%, 66% more light and more electricity, and only 50% more light. But once you turn on a light, most people turn on 1,000, because once you're doing it, you might as well get as much as you're going to get. So you tend to grow under thousands, but if you're just growing for yourself, a 600 watt's fine. What I like to talk about is, when I talk about light, is how much space it takes to absorb a certain amount of light. If you have a 400 watt light, you're going to grow in a space about this table. You'll have a 4-foot 8-bulb T5 that'll grow over a 2x4 space about 2 feet deep. 2x4 is 8 square feet, 2 feet deep is 16 cubic feet. So a 400 watt light requires about 16 cubic feet worth of plant material, the canopy, not the stalks, not how high your plant is, just the leaves that absorb light. It takes about 16 cubic feet for a 400 watt light. A 600 watt light is twice as bright. So you need twice the area, which is a 4x4 space 2 feet deep. And 1,000 watts, 3 times a 400. So you need like a 5x5 space 2 feet deep, which is 50 cubic feet. That's what it takes to absorb all the light from a 1,000 watt bulb. If we know then that plants double during flower, then we know that plants need twice the light in flower as well. So if you veg with a 400, you flower with a 600. If you veg with a 600, you flower with 1,000. If you try to do the thing where you veg with a 400 and you flower with 1,000 and your plant doubles, by the end of flower, you'll have 800 watts worth of plant. At the end of flower, you'll still be throwing 200 watts at the floor, which means halfway through flower, you were throwing 500 watts at the floor. You know, and at the start of flower, okay, so you just keep throwing light at the floor. The object is to get a huge amount of plants, like 600 watts worth of plant, like 4x4, 2 feet deep, under 1,000 watt light. And over the next 8 weeks as it doubles, it'll double into a 5x5 space 2 feet deep. And you've used up all of the light. But notice nowhere in here have I told you anything about nutrients. That's because in the photosynthesis equation, there are no nutrients. Light for energy, CO2 and water equals sugar and oxygen. That's the end of the equation. Nowhere in there do nutrients exist. So when people go, oh, how much am I going to get? How do I get more? How do I, what we're talking about is how to either efficient the light, make sure that all the light's being converted into sugar, and that's determined by the health of the plant and grower talent. The next component is, do you add more light? Because if you double your nutrients, you'll kill your crop. The correct amount of nutrients is the correct amount of nutrients, and anything more or less than that amount negatively affects taste and quality. So we're looking for the correct amount of nutrients. And let's say you know the exact correct amount of nutrients, and let's say you double your light and you double your space. Would you double your nutrients? No, you'd use the same nutrients in the next space, because nutrients don't have anything to do with yield. Nutrients have to do with the health of growing of the plant. You are not going to grow a faster plant by giving them more nutrients. That's like you drinking seawater thinking you're going to be healthier. It doesn't work like that. What it does work, though, is the two limiting things in the photosynthesis equation are light and CO2. So we start off with how much light you have. You get X from a 400, 2X from a 600, 3X from 1,000. Then a light mover, something like this. Here's a light mover. Light goes back and forth. When you use a light mover like this, you can see that the light comes, eventually it makes it over here and then it goes away. What's nice about a light mover is you can put the light a foot closer to the plants and get a foot more penetration without overheating the plants, because you take the hot spot off the plant and you move it down the way. So rather than doing a 5x5, you might do a 4x6 or a 4x8 and run the light down to the end, put it closer, and by the time the plant heats up to a dangerous level, the light's already gone, so you never get there. They talk about how much light is lost from the bottom of the light to the top of the canopy. And there's two different ways to think about this. Think about the light like a street light. A street light casts a very wide arc, but you get less and less light as it goes. But an LED, like a little handheld LED, you can shine on a building a block away and still see the dot. Where an HPS or a gas light has this spread like this, an LED doesn't have that kind of spread. You can see where it gets bright right there. Well, it's coming back. It's moving. All right. So here's the edge of the light. You can see if I move further away, the angle looks something like this. If you've got a 4x4 space, well, this is a 550 watt next light. It has all the spectrum of an LED plus all the spectrum of an HPS in one. It's 550 watts and it works like 1,000. LEDs have a little bit of magic because LEDs have more penetration than an HPS light. With HPS, you tend to strip the inside of a plant and the flowers end up on the outside because you don't have the penetration. But with an LED, you have spectacular penetration. Together they work very well, but you can't put a 1,000 watt HPS and a 1,000 watt LED together unless you have 2,000 watts worth of plant. The problem that you run into is if you run a scrog like this and you put an LED over it, it doesn't light up the whole canopy, unless you put it on a light mover. So with an LED, right? With an LED, you can put the light further away. Just like you can shine an LED on a building down the block and still see that red dot, because the light is collimated. Think about a flashlight hard over. You can go see as far as that flashlight can go. You turn it the other way and it goes wide, but you can't see as far. So if you have a very big hood, it's like having a wide flashlight. It doesn't penetrate as far. So you end up with, here's the difference between a wide hood and an LED. If you have very tall plants, the light's only going to get to the HPS light's only going to get to the top of it. But if you have LEDs, they're going to be all the way down to the floor because it has more penetration. So you have this combination of two different ways to use the light. Your job is to figure out how to use it for your garden. You okay? Want water? Okay. It's your job to figure out how to use it. So if you have a very wide canopy and you're using an LED, of course you're not going to get what you're supposed to get because you're not using it right. That would be like trying to drive your car with a couple of flashlights on the hood. You don't have enough light to brake to see far enough. So if you try to put an LED over a wide crop, you're going to lose it. But then if you try to put an HPS with a supersized hood over tall plants, you're going to lose it. So people say, LED. But they don't say that about HPS because they've kind of worked out the details of HPS. But LEDs are spectacular. This is a next light. It has all the light, all the spectrum of an LED plus all the spectrum of an HPS. And you move it back and forth, and they work really well. They also work really, really well as a supplement to HPS light. So if you've got a 1,000 watt HPS light, instead of stripping the middles out of the plant, without increasing your plant count, and just by adding light, you can get more yield from the same amount of plants. I tell people if you got a 1,000-watt overhead, get a 200-watt supplemental. If you've got a couple of 1,000 watts, you may want multiple 200s or a 400 kind of beaming across the whole crop. There really is a difference in flower production between an LED and an HPS. You can really see the difference in quality. Together they work spectacular, but you have to use it in the right way, because if you do this, you're going to get less than you're supposed to, and then I'm either going to get a customer that thinks, oh man, HPS sucks, or a customer that thinks, oh man, LED sucks. But when you tape a couple flashlights to the hood of your car and you run into a wall because you couldn't see it coming, of course you're going to blame it on the car's headlights and you're going to hate that car. But the reality was, the grower wasn't using it right. There isn't any problem in the store, including the one where you hung your lights from fish wire and it falls on your plants and breaks your hood and the bulb and the plant. It's all grower fault. Everything in this store works. Somebody hates everything in this store because they failed with it. But the reality is, they probably water their plants in this display thing with broken jugs. When they come in, we drop a jug, the lid cracks and it starts to spill. Up, pick it up, it goes in the grow room, because if a plant's yellow, it needs N. If a plant's purple, it needs mag. If it has tip twist, like drawstring, it needs calcium. These are simple things that plants need, and the answers are pretty simple. Usually it's because when a plant needs something, it's kind of one of a couple of things. You put the light too close. When I talk about putting the light too close, this is what I'm talking about. A hood requires a certain spread. You saw with the LED as I moved my hand in that there was an angle of the light. You have to make it such that the spread covers the whole area. So if you've got a 600-watt light, the spread has to be out over the 4x4 area. The next thing to consider is a plant cannot grow with 101% light. Let's say you have the absolute perfect garden, whatever the fuck that is, because it doesn't exist. You have the perfect whatever. If you give the plant 101% in a perfect garden, you've got too much light for the rest of the equation. You have too much light for the photosynthesis equation. Your plant stops growing. It bleaches, it whitens. The leaves, the flowers, it can't. These are usually like in the middle of the garden, right underneath the lights. You can't get 101% light in plant growth. So if you put your plant up against 100%, she has nowhere to go. So not only do you have to pay attention to the spread to make sure it's getting to the edge of your crop, you have to make sure that the plant is still another foot or two away from that, or she can't grow. So quite frequently you'll get people that come in with the cutting and their 1,000-watt light is over the plant like this. Not only is that plant incapable of growing anywhere, you're never going to get anything out of it, no matter how many nutrients you feed it. So what I try to show you guys is matching the hood to the shape of your garden. If you've got big plants, you're going to need a focused hood with more penetration. If you've got a wide garden like a scrog, you're going to need a bigger hood with greater width and less penetration. Because if you try to put a focused hood over a wide garden, you're not going to get what you're supposed to get. Now, not once yet have I told you how to grow. And I have no intention of telling you how to grow because it's irrelevant to me. All this stuff works. What I try to get you guys to understand is the relationship between light, yield, how much plants you have, and the health of your garden. In the photosynthesis equation, CO2 and water equals sugar and oxygen. Nowhere in this equation do nutrients exist. So if you double your nutrients, it does not affect the math equation. Plants are autotrophs. They take their energy from the sun. They don't break down nutrients. They don't have to eat anything like we do. Nutrients are merely the salt that balances the plant with its environment. Too much salt on the outside, the plant will dehydrate to try to balance the salt on the inside. And you'll get miniaturization and a smaller plant 4 weeks from now than you started with. While everyone's plants just keep growing, yours just keeps shrinking. So in this first thing, we talk about total light. That's light plus a light mover plus CO2. Because in the photosynthesis equation, that's all that's on the one side. So yield, the results, is based on the input. The more inputs we have, the faster the reaction, the greater the carbon she can store. Plants are carbon fixers. She takes the C out of the CO2, she releases the O, she keeps the H from the water and some of the O's, and she makes sugar from that equation. You can see the equation. Here's the photosynthesis equation. Using light for energy, she takes C and O. She makes sugar, C6H12O6, and releases O2. So the O2 is her byproduct, that's her waste. She also transpires to sweat also. So the amount of sugar she can produce is based on pretty much two things, light and CO2. So your yield is based on how fast you can convert light into sugar and oxygen. That's the end of this equation. Nutrients merely are the salt that enable her to keep turgor, the correct amount of salt inside the plant with matching salt outside the plant. Same thing. So yield is based on light. So we start with how much light you have. Let's say you have a 1,000-watt bulb and a light mover. You essentially have 1,250 watts. If a 1,000-watt light requires a 5x5 space 2 feet deep, 1,250 watts requires more. And if you add CO2, suddenly your 50 cubic feet is like 75 cubic feet. That's a 1,000-watt light on a light rail and a 4x8, just 1,000 watt with CO2 on a light rail. That'll fill up a whole 4x8 tent. You figure 1,000 watts is 5x5, 2 feet deep, that's 50 cubic feet. A 4x8 tent is 32 cubic feet. 2 feet deep is 64 cubic feet in a 4x8 tent. So 50 watts times 25%, you end up with 62.5 cubic feet, so you're right on the track. So pretty much a light rail and a 1,000-watt light, perfect for a 4x8 tent. You'll get a little more penetration, you can go almost 3 feet. So now you've got 4x8 times 3, 32 times 3, you've got 90 cubic feet. A light rail and CO2 is 50% more, so you have 1,500 watts. You'd require 75 cubic feet to fully express that light and get what you were supposed to. But it's easily doable. You go from 24 flowers to 36 if you had a light rail CO2 and everything is, I'll show you, if everything is healthy. So there are different problems your plant can have. You can have bug problems, leaf problems, light problems, root problems. There are all sorts of problems. The more problems you have, the less you get. The next one down is life cycle. If you know you've got a 4-week veg and an 8-week flower, that's a 12-week life cycle. You're going to finish the last couple weeks. If you're in hydro, you finish for 2 weeks. So basically you have a 10-week life cycle. That's what you're shooting for. 4 plus 8 is 12, minus the 2 weeks it takes to finish in hydro. And then finally, how much plant material you have. Because if you've got a 4x4 space 2 feet deep with a 1,000-watt light over it, you can't get what you're supposed to get. Because a 1,000-watt light requires a 5x5 space 2 feet deep. So you are not going to fully express a 1,000-watt light. The equations come into play here. If you want to know how many nutrients you need for any week, what's the life cycle of the plant? The life cycle in this case is 10. 4 plus 8 minus 2, the life cycle is 10. Let's just say we have a 1,000-watt light. We know 1,000 divided by 10 is 100. And then we said we were in week 5. So 100 times 5 is 500 ppm. So somewhere in week 5, you should be at about 500 ppm. So if this is our track with a 4-week veg and an 8-week flower, if this is finished, then right about here, we should have peak plant material and we should have peak ppm. So if this is 1,000 here, then we know we can't be giving that plant 1,000. If you give the little plant 1,000, right, you have to have enough plant material to support it. So without telling you which nutrient or how to grow or any of these things, all I try to put into perspective is you don't feed a small plant like a big one. Because if you fed a small plant like a big one, by the time you had a big plant, what are you going to feed it? More than it's supposed to get? The correct amount of nutrients is the correct amount of nutrients, and anything more or less than that is only going to negatively affect the final product. So there is no exact number. Like I said, when you're good, different nutrients will produce a different result. But 500 ppm at about week 5, just coming off veg into flower, that's pretty good for media. If you're in hydro, you might have a little more, a little less, but it's a pretty good starting point. ppm should never exceed light. So if you have a 1,000-watt light plus a light rail plus CO2, the max ppm you'll hit here is about 1,500 because you have about 1,500 watts worth of light. But there's this scale. So you don't give a plant that's this size this much light. This is like a little 50-watt plant. This is a little 50-watt plant. If you had a 1,000-watt light over it, you would need 20 of these things to absorb all the light. 20 of them means that you can't put the light here, or 12 of them won't be under the light. 20 of them means that you have to continue to raise the light until all of them are lit with penetration such that the bottom leaves don't suffer. That's the name of this game, converting that light, absorbing it by the green of the leaf and converting it into sugar. So the closer you get, the more penetration you get, but the top could get too intense, which is what we saw in the peppers in there, the top. But it's a store, right? I mean, it gets away from you because you're busy selling stuff. I know, the shoemaker shoes, every store is just like that. But it's still a really good looking garden that you have in it. It's probably one of the best ones that I've seen in Texas. Yes. So this is the idea. You're looking to absorb all the light with the green of the leaf. Now as this plant gets bigger, if it's twice the size, you wouldn't need the plant next to it. So the bigger the plant, the fewer required to absorb 1,000-watt light, or any watt for that matter. If this plant was literally 5 by 5, 2 feet deep, you would only need one. If it was less than that, you would need more than that. So it doesn't 5 by 5, you can grow one big plant 6 feet around, don't care. You have to change the hood to grow a plant big instead of wide. But either way, all you have to do is absorb the green of the leaf. And, you know, that's the idea, is you've got to convert all that light into sugar. Then you've got to figure out the gears, because you're not going to be in 6th gear trying to grow that little plant. And if you try to grow a big plant like this with a compact fluorescent in 1st gear, you can't get there. So you don't start in 3rd, and you don't go from 1st to 5th, which is why buying one light in a rotation, like if you just buy 1,000-watt light, it's not quite the same now with digital dimmables, because you can turn them down. But if you have a little plant like this, and you've got a 1,000-watt light, you're going to be throwing 950 watts at the floor this week. And next week, you're going to throw 900 watts at the floor. And the week after that, you're going to throw 850 watts at the floor. It's a lot of electricity to spend in a veg. That's why I usually have people do a 2-light veg, because you can have a 400-watt veg and a 600-watt flower, a 600-watt veg and a 1,000-watt flower. And if you grow a 600-watt veg and you put it in flower, the first week you're only throwing 400 watts at the floor. That's not bad. If it turns out to be a dimmable, you can turn your 1,000-watt down to a 750, and now you have 750 watts over a 600-watt veg. Perfect. You're throwing 150 watts at the floor, but now the plants get all the light they want without too much light. So as the plants get bigger, PPMs and light increase. Until you get to the point where you're finishing, then you decrease PPMs, but light doesn't change. This is the relationship that gets you start to finish. And in this equation, like I said, if we were in week 5, you'd be at 500 ppm. Okay, so week 5, right here, 500 ppm. Out here, 1,000. The last 2 weeks, 500, and then nothing if you're in media, or 500 if you're in hydro, and then, you know, even less so. The relationship between how much light and how much ppm is a scale-based, like shifting gears. You're not going to be in the fast lane in 2nd gear. That doesn't work. But it's awesome across the street, or if you're trying to pass up on an on-ramp, you're trying to get up to speed, 2nd gear is perfect. But you don't start in 3rd, and you don't go from 1st to 5th. And that's what causes too much light and too many nutrients. Because people take their 1,000-watt light that's meant to fill up this huge space, and they put it over their cutting. And it can't go anywhere because it's too much light, right? Not only is their light so close, all of the nutrient companies would have you believe that you require 1,000 ppm, 1,000 watts worth of ppm. All of the nutrient companies base their schedules on 1,000-watt happy, healthy harvest. If you have a 600-watt light, what are you supposed to do? Cut them in half, yeah. You cut the nutrients in half. And if you have a 400-watt light, you cut them in by 60, 75%. Why? Because nutrients are merely the calorie that supports the amount of exercise or light that you do. Think of it like fuel in your car. The motor, that does the work. The fuel merely supports it. So the octane is the calories in fuel. Food is the calories for people. Nutrients are salt is the calories for plants. And light is the fuel. So light is exercise, and nutrients are merely the calories that support it. And I tell you guys, there's a difference between nutrients. But there's only a difference at the good end, when you're good and you're getting what you're supposed to time after time. Then you will notice a difference in nutrients. But if your plants look sick and shitty, I tell you guys that yield is based on how much light you have, times how healthy your garden is, times how full it is. Because if you've got a garden half full of sick, shitty plants, this isn't going to turn out like you think it is. This is about the health of the plant. The faster you can convert light into sugar, the greater the yield. The correct amount of nutrients is the correct amount of nutrients for that time and space. So in week 5, you'd be at 500. At week 10, you'd be at 1,000. At week 2, you would be at 200. If you're finishing, you'd be at less than the peak. It's coming off the peak. So how much gas you give it, how much nutrients you give it, is based on what you're trying to accomplish and how much light that you guys are throwing at it. You can throw a 1,000-watt light at a plant this big. You can feed it like it's a 1,000-watt plant, but none of those things are going to help. The correct amount of light and the correct amount of nutrients are what you're shooting for. And again, I haven't told you how to grow. All I do is tell you the statistical probability of how to avoid failure. Because the reality is, if you don't fail, by definition, you've succeeded, or something close to it anyway. The statistical probability is that when people come to the store, they're excited and they're going to do too much. The guy this morning, he read it on the internet. Guy comes in, spends $600 this morning, right? I'd like to say he was here for the show, but he just happened to come in. And so he's sitting here and he buys the equipment, he's got everything, and he's going to go home and do it right now. So I said, dude, here's the grow book, and here's my No More Grow More fact cards. They're $30 for the pair. You just spent $600. $30 is 5%. And more than increases your chance of success. If you don't do all the failures, you will succeed. The guy goes, no, I'm okay. I was like, I had to sell it to him for 20 bucks for him to say yes. But here's a guy who spent $600, ready to go home and start right now. And I literally, here's the instruction book on how not to fail. No, I'm good. And so what do you suspect that guy's going to do? So most people that start this fail. If it wasn't, prices would go down, supply would increase, and the general supply and demand curve would shift such that it's not worth doing. It's very difficult to get the correct amount of yield that you're supposed to get. And when you start to do the math of it, it gets even worse once you factor in the reality of the whole project. If you've got a 1,000-watt flower, you have a 600-watt veg. If you have 2,000 watts in flower, you have a 1,000-watt veg, or you can't grow enough material to put into the garden and fully express the light. So let's talk about air conditioning. Generally, the small-end air conditioners are 1,000 watts. They have that little $500 roller that we sell. Perfect. It's 1,100 watts, and it will cool 2,000. Then they have the big 1-ton units that are 1,000 watts. They're literally 100 watts less than those shitty little roller ones. It will cool 6,000 watts and a CO2 burner, which is an enormous amount of heat. They're not on all the time, but it'll cool. The AC will be on all the time, but you can have a 1,000-watt AC that will cool 6,000 watts in a CO2 burner, or you can have a 1,000-watt AC that will struggle to do 2,000 watts, depending on your buy-in. Like anything else, if you buy the commercial grade, it's more on the buy-in. They run about 2,500 instead of 500, but you get more than 5 times the amount of cooling. You go from 2 lights to 6 lights plus a burner, and the same amount of electricity cools 6 lights and a burner that you were using to cool 2 lights, no burner. The thing is, once you turn on 6 lights, now you can add CO2 because you have an AC, you don't need to vent. If you add CO2 to 6 lights, you get 25% more yield. That means you have 7,500 watts in flower, effective watts. You only use 6,000 watts of electricity and only get 6,000 watts worth of heat. So CO2 continues to be more and more valuable as you go. I tell you guys, once you have 6 lights, there's no point in venting. You might as well turn on an air conditioner at that point and add CO2. Why wouldn't you? You're going to have to cool the garden no matter what. Even if you vent, the glass in the hood is the second hottest thing in your garden. That's why your car is 140 when it's only 100 degrees outside, because the glass converts IR and UV waves into heat. Touch the glass the next time you're in your car on a hot day. It's the hottest fucking thing in your car besides the seat that's burning your ass after sitting. That's because light is heat. All light. Even this LED. The difference is an LED directly converts electricity into light. There's no gas in it too. All the lights that we see, like the HID lights and here on this display, they all take a gas in a tube, they heat the gas by sending an arc across it, and it emits photons. The stuff in our ceiling, like these fluorescents, they work differently. They take an electron in an orbital shell around the nucleus, they raise it to a higher shell, and then when the energy goes away, the electron falls back down and emits a photon. That's how these work, and they're so cool. They don't produce nearly the amount of light per watt that an HID does or an LED. LED produces an enormous amount of light for way less heat. It's like a technological marvel, as long as you're using it in the right way. It also produces it in a very collimated form and doesn't spread it out. So, I mean, there are pluses and minuses. But that's light, more heat, more garden. That's what we're shooting for. So the next thing is, if you've got a 2,000 watt flower and a 1,000 watt veg and a 1,000 watt AC, you're running 4,000 watts. You're running 4,000 watts, but you're only getting 2,000 watts worth of yield. So even if you get what you're supposed to, divided by 4, you're getting half of what you're getting in flowers spread over the total garden. Now suddenly we jump up to, like, say 6,000 watts, and we still have a 1,000 watt AC, and we have a burner, a CO2 burner. Now essentially we have 7,500 watts worth of light, plus 3,000 in veg, and we're at 10,000 watts. Where the AC was one of 3, now we have 1 on 10 worth of light. And 1 on 3 is like 33%, 1 on 10 is 10%. So the fact of the AC suddenly shrinks an enormous amount. So the more lights you have, the more efficient it is to use an AC if you buy the right AC. So once you have rows and rows of lights, it's never about venting. You take out the glass, like rolling down the windows in your car. Now it's only going to be as hot as outside. Everything will get stolen. But forget that fact. You roll down the windows. I got a Jeep. It's got a front windshield, no doors, no nothing. It never gets hotter than outside. It's got a top, so the seat doesn't get the sun, so the Jeep's never hotter than outside. But you get in your car, and sure as shit, it's going to be like 40 degrees hotter on a hot day. That glass in your hood does the exact same thing as a window in your car. The more lights you have, the more glass you have. Let's talk about venting. If the air is so cool that you can suck cool air through the hood, because that's what we're talking about, not just removing the heat. You can remove the heat, but the glass is still producing heat in the garden. So if you've got all that glass and you take it out, suddenly the garden isn't nearly as hot. You can continue to vent the light, but now you can't use CO2 if you vent too much. There are some things where I tell you guys, if you've got like 4 lights, you can get a box, run a little bit of ducting to each hood, put a small fan like a 4-inch on it, turn it down with a speed controller to a 3-inch fan, and just suck a little bit of air out of each hood and take out the glass. There's no point in you sucking in the far end of a hood if you can just take out the glass, not have all that extra heat production, and suck in. You can still use CO2 in a situation where you vent very little air as opposed to a sealed room. But I'll tell you a story. We had 4 lights. We had a little thermal laser LED temperature gauge, and my hoods were 151 degrees with a 1,000-watt light. It's about 5 square feet of radiant sheet metal. We had a duct and just the little fans, not the big fan. We just had like a little 6-inch version. This one's the Hurricane from Sunlight Supply. I had the 6-inch version of this, pulling out of a 1,000-watt light with just a few feet of ducting from a tent. My ducting was 99 degrees, and the hood was literally like 151 degrees. I bought an insulator and covered the hood, and I came back in an hour. Lifted the insulator, and my hood was 102 degrees. The hood metal, 5 square feet of radiant sheet metal, came down 49 degrees. 33% less temperature in the hood, radiant sheet metal. All that heat went into the ducting, and my ducting was now 114 degrees, 15 degrees hotter than it was before. So I know where all the heat's going, into the ducting and out of the tent. Covering the hood, taking out the glass, and venting a small amount of air is the most effective, coolest way to create a garden. The wings like this are less, not this bulb, don't count this bulb, it's just a fun bulb. The wings like this produce less heat than a wing like this. Why? Because aluminum foil and aluminum take the light and convert it into heat. In fact, this is a glass tube. If glass is the second hottest thing in your garden, that thing's going to get really hot. But the trade-off is glass tubes are phenomenal for venting. You just bump them up against each other. You don't even need any ducting. And then suddenly you can run 40 of them in a row, and they're awesome. Or you could just buy that thing and buy a hood and get an air conditioner, because if you don't have cold enough air outside, there's no point in sucking it into the room. Because if you're trying to cool a 140 degree light with 100 degree air, congratulations, you can get it down to 100 and some degrees, but you're not going to get 70 out of it. So you still have to cool the air. Once you understand that you have to cool the air, there is no reason for you not to buy an air conditioner. There's no reason for you to vent. And now you add CO2, so you get more from the same electricity. That's what this is about. You're trying to get the most yield you can, because that's the definition of a grower, a true grower. You maximize yield for any garden situation. Those are the conditions. You get the maximum yield possible in any garden situation. That's a grow. I can grow any of the chemicals, any of the systems, anything in this store. Because I can grow. Otherwise, there really is a difference between systems. Media, like soil, cocoa, and Grodan, those are all the easiest way to grow. Hydro is faster, so it's a little more complicated. If you have a problem, it happens faster. And Aero gives you the best, most significant results. But it has very few sick days. And if you have a problem in aeroponics, you might as well throw everything away and start over, because it's unrecoverable. Things happen so fast. So really what we're talking about is how much light and when. What's your expected yield? So do you have a favorite question that you ask customers when they come in the store? I mean, it's a loaded question, I do. But do you have a favorite question?
Was it? I mean, like, it all depends on, you know, how many plants, right? That
How many
changes
plants?
everything. How many plants? What type of area they're working with, right? Those are the two things. You can tune everything around that.
That's funny. I have a different question, but it's all about tuning everything around that. I ask them how much light they have in flower. Because if you have 1,000 watts in flower, I know everything I need to know about what your garden is supposed to look like. You got 1,000 watts in flower. I automatically know you should have 600 watts in veg. I also automatically know that you should be getting 24 flowers every 60 days. I also know that you should have a 5x5 space, 2 feet deep, or a plant this big around, or 4 plants that look like this, or 20 plants that look like this, or if you're in a GH Aeroflow, 60 plants that look like this, with a big hood. So the next question I ask somebody, 1,000 watt, you must have a 600 watt in veg. And they go, no, I got a 300 watt, 4 foot, 6 bulb T5. I go, oh, then you're only getting, 16 flowers per 1,000. So you're getting 16 flowers per 1,000. Yeah, about that. I go, oh, okay. Would you like 24 flowers per 1,000? Would you like to get the correct amount? Because a 1,000 watt light's worth 24 flowers.
Like you.
And they go, oh, I've been doing this for years. No, I know what I'm doing. I go, dude, you're missing 50% of your yield every harvest. What I don't want you to do is think about that in the store. Tonight when you go home and things are quiet, you're about ready for bed, and the guy at the store told you you're missing 50% of what you're supposed to get. Times how many years have you been doing this? I want you to think about it in the quiet of the night. Because if I'm right, suddenly you've got a third less than you're supposed to, times 5 years, 6 crops a year, times 5, 30 crops, times 1/3.
And while we searched for a way
That is a
through,
whole lot of profit you're missing.
there was an
And it
avalanche.
looks like you're profitable because you're doing okay and the value is good.
And then I was alone.
But the reality is you're still missing a third of what you're supposed to get because you
So I
did not
set
veg
forth
enough
for
plants to
Dravania.
fully convert the light into flower.
I knew full
And
well
with
what
a
might
simple
happen where I
fix like,
found.
tell you what, why don't you bring me
But I
in
could
that
not
300 watt
survive on my
T5.
own.
I'll sell you a 600 watt and give you a little bit of credit.
I was
Now I
found.
got one use thing, I got some money out of the guy and he's got the
And
right
not by
thing.
a mere dragon,
Now the person that's
but
doing
by
that
the
usually
great
does one
worm
of two things.
Hraesvelgr.
They'll go home and they'll tell,
And
they
it
always
was
tell me in
then
the
that
store.
I knew
No, never.
why I had been
Whatever,
given
dumbass,
this
I've been doing this
gift.
for years.
For with it I heard
They'll come back
his
depending on
voice
their age.
and
If
saw
they're
the
over
truth
45,
through his
they'll be back in
eyes.
3 days. If they're 19 to 45, they'll be back in 2 months. Because they
I
will have
was
gone to
chosen
every
to
other
deliver
store
this
because they don't want to hear
revelation
what
to
I
the
have to
people,
hear.
to
So
bring
they'll go to
dragon
every
and
other
man
store to try to
together
figure
as
out
they
why
once
their
were
shit
and should
isn't what
ever
it's
be.
supposed to be, and it's still too small and they're still not getting the yield because the only thing they'll believe from me is I'm supposed to be getting this yield. They won't believe anything else.
Or they're hoping by 2 months you've forgotten that you already told them what to do and they didn't listen to you.
Right, and that's exactly what happens. They'll go to every other store and in 2 months they come back and they all say the same
Be
thing.
like that.
Man,
You
it's
have to
just
believe
like you
me.
said. I'm still not getting
Because
what I'm supposed to, and she's smaller than she
beyond
was
my
6 weeks
control.
ago. What are you talking about now? And I know they went to every other store. Yeah, now I'm listening. So, the other half is they always tell me I'm testing some shit for a manufacturer.
Yet the
Bullshit.
Dravanians,
You're not finishing, you're not getting what
though
you're
they
supposed
know
to.
where
No
the fault
manufacturer
truly
wants you to rep
lies,
their product, you're failing.
fell
That's
upon
not how
them with
this works.
such
If
fury.
they wanted to rep you, you would be repping them. But that guy always tells me, no, man, I'm doing this product, no, I'm doing this product, no, I'm doing this product, and switch to this product. The reality is they never finish because there's so many problems. What I really try to get you guys to do is smooth it out so you get what you're supposed to. So if the guys come back in 2 or 3 days, usually they're ready to listen. We also want to do some swapping because now that they're ready to listen, they have some money. So that's how I hook them. Like if I know they're not going to buy anything, I tease them. Oh man, you should be getting like 30% more. And then they think about it and think about it and think about it and think about it, and eventually they come back. Always. It always works like that. But you got to gamble and let the customer walk out your door. But I do this so often, I know how it turns out, right? So usually like 85% of the time they come back and they buy the shit. But they come back and they're ready to listen now. So if everything's going well, I know that if your yield is 3/4 of what it's supposed to be, if you're at about 18 flowers per 1,000 watt, I know that everything is going the way it's supposed to. You didn't have any problems. What you don't have is enough plant material to convert all the light. So if you're getting pretty close, and especially if you're getting pretty close consistently, now we just talk about modifying a few things. Plant shape, because the last thing you want to do is have one branch that's taller than everything else, than the canopy, because you have to put the light above that. So you cut that out, and that's a big step because now the light, all right. So there's a couple of things usually if the guys are finishing, but they're not getting what they're supposed to. Usually it's add a plant or two, veg 2 weeks longer, shape up the plant better. It's the guys that are getting half of what they're supposed to, but they're still finishing. Those guys usually have a problem at some point, like not enough mag, overwatering, too many nutrients, but not way too many nutrients, so it just kind of builds up as you go. So if you're getting like about half of what you're supposed to, really I've got to go through all the questions and fine tune it. You ask plant count. I don't ask plant count because light's based on yield. You get a 1,000 watt light, you got 24 flowers. Don't care how many plants, one big one, 4 that take, it's about a canopy, 50 cubic feet per 1,000 watt light.
Flowers, you're talking about
Ounces, what?
parts of the plant.
No.
Oh, okay. All
A
right.
400 watt light, you get 8 flowers.
Okay.
Now you,
Yeah, no.
16 flowers from 1,000,
Yeah.
24 flowers from, 16 flowers from a 600 watt, 24 flowers. So we're talking about 1.5 pounds of produce
Right.
from a 1,000 watt light, a pound of produce from a 600 watt light, a half pound of produce from a 400 watt light. 1,000 watts, 3 times the brightness, you should expect 3 times the yield, you need 3 times the canopy. You can't grow an apple without growing a tree, and you can't grow 24 ounces of produce in your pocket. It requires a certain amount of space to convert that light. Cornfields, acres and acres, thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of acres. Every fucking plant is the same height. They all do the same thing at the same time. So sometimes what I do is I run into people that have 3/4 of what they're supposed to get. They're at like 18, 20 ounces of produce. And it turns out that they have 5 different kinds of plants under their flower light. Okay, that would explain it. Of a kind, of a size, under a light. If you've got one plant that's here and the rest are here, your light has to go above the highest point in your garden. So everything else suffers for this one plant. All right, maybe you want that one plant, whatever. But not every plant grows in every shape equally well. So shape is a lot of it. So we talk about shaping plants. Anyway, so yield, how much light you have, times how full your garden is, times how healthy they are. So really still talking about converting light into sugar. It's literally like a 3-hour bullshit school about how to turn light into sugar effectively. And because what people think it is not what it actually is, right? Because everybody talks about, oh, their light's 18 inches off the plant. Oh, you look at the guys who have that 3x3 box that's lined with aluminum foil, and it's got like 17 CFLs screwed into it all the way around. This hobby isn't for everybody. And I'll be the first to tell you, this may not be for you. Now let's say you've got 200 watts in CFL light. If you've got a 4-week veg and an 8-week flower on a 10-week cycle, 200 watts divided by 10 is 20 watts a week. You've got 20 watts worth of light a week. But you would also be at 20 ppm then, wouldn't you? Look at this. You see this? You see this? All right, good girl. That's what it takes to give 20 ppm. You got 200 in your tap water. I have 550 in Vegas. It's a different experience. But to get to feed this plant, what are we talking about here? Nobody feeds these fucking house plants. Nobody. Look what it's growing under, that much light. You know, there's nothing that you have to do to that plant. And if it does need nutrients, she'll tell you, and then you'll feed her. Okay, so you only feed them when they ask for it. You only water them when they ask for it. You're not looking to be in there with like 4 ounces a day. You'll rot the root hairs. There's no roots. So shaping of plants. Shaping plants is super important. If you get a runaway top, the light has to be placed above that runaway top or that'll burn. We saw that happen here in this display. So there's topping, there's lollipopping, and there's super cropping. Oh yeah. Hey, they don't need any help from you, I mean.
We always see your dog toy, we never see the dog.
Oh, there's a different, that's a different dog. There's a camera here because we're doing a grow school. If you're not in, you know, I mean, like, you don't have to, you can just go in. So if you don't want to be on it, if you have some questions.
I do have a question about venting.
Yes.
I had the tube lights, and they were all connected, and I just left one end open, so I was sucking air
From the room out.
and then out.
Right.
And then I felt like, well, then that means I'm sucking hot air into the room from whatever cracks the ambient air outside can.
Yes.
And so then I changed it. I hooked the open end to the floor, cut a hole in it, and then I was sucking air from the outside, pumping it to the outside.
Okay, so you're always limited by ambient,
Right.
outside
Right.
ambient. If your outside ambient is that cool, great, open up the windows. Like, you know, San Diego grows. You just open up a window on both ends and let the cool ocean air blow through. Right? Like I'm in Vegas, it's
Well,
just,
yeah, this was here, so.
yeah, so it doesn't work. But if you're venting
So
through,
it's not cool enough, is what you're saying.
well, I don't know, because you have to tell me how the garden feels. Also, you're bringing in humid air. So if you've got a bunch of lights together and you're venting here, but you're sucking in here, you would put the CO2 and air conditioner here so it moves across your whole garden. What I challenge you on is the math. Now you, however, were sucking from a different room, room A. You were venting room B and blowing it into room C. So you didn't really suck any air out of this room.
Right.
If you don't suck any air out of the room, how are you cooling it?
I see.
Okay? If you had just taken out the glass and quit venting, you would have had the same result. And now you can add CO2. Because the glass is the second hottest thing in the room. So if you took all the glass out, or instead of run them in a chain, you ran in parallel, one to each, and you took very little air out, just enough to remove the heat, that would have been the same thing. Now, if outside is so cool that you want outside air in your room, perfect, then don't worry about the cracks, don't run the other end out of the room.
Yeah.
So you can try to pull hot air out and replace it with hot air. Or you could take out the glass, quit venting, add CO2, and now cool the room. If the air is so cool outside, you still wouldn't vent the lights. Just suck the air out of the room and bring fresh air in, but you don't get CO2. There are some places that are that cool, but most places aren't. So you're always going to add AC.
Yeah, I never was able to use, I never used CO2.
How many lights did you have?
I had 4 1,000 watt.
So your 4,000 lights would have been 25% more. You would have been at 5,000 watts worth of yield for the same electricity. Wait, don't think about that here during the show, tonight, when it's quiet. Think about 25% more times how long you were doing it.
8 years.
8 years
Upon an
times
airship,
6 harvests a year.
conceived
So you're at
within the
48
mind of
harvests
Sid
times
Garner,
1,000
renegade
watts.
prodigy
That's 1.5
who had come to call Eorzea
1,000
home.
watt light times 48, so you're at 72 pounds of produce you missed. And that's what I mean by a lot of people finish, but you don't get what you're supposed to.
I was also worried about hot spots.
High into the heavens, where isles of earth and stone floated as clouds. A frontier the knights of Ishgard had scarce begun to explore. To a fledgling outpost, within the sea of clouds, where careworn scouts ever scanned the skies for winged
IR is not an
shadows,
IR block.
she came.
The stuff that's an IR block, the infrared block, you have to have infrared block. That's a thermal insulation. It's still not, it still doesn't fight FLIR, which is the lowest level of infrared radar. Infrared is infrared. The IR block, let me grab something, I'll show you that. This stuff's thick wire. The number one big crop plant killer is a duct failure by cheap duct. So the normal provides the stores with these swatches.
Oh, okay, so that's like that stuff over there, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. It's not the same thing that's inside of a tin. They have a couple of different things. They've got Mylar, IR block. So this is, you can see it's triangle, it's like knurled, and it scatters the waves so it doesn't work. So it can't fit. So this is thermoflow ducting. Grab a side of it, grab a couple things like this, both hands, glasses, there you go, and pull. There's a difference between this stuff and the tubing and the ducting that you buy for a dryer vent duct. Right? So this stuff here is black on the inside so it absorbs light, doesn't reflect it. Silver on the outside, and then in there you can see it's threaded with a wire ring mesh. So halfway through flowering, cheap shit bursts from pressure and temperature, and you come home and find your garden dead. It doesn't happen with thermoflow. Right. If you made it halfway through flower, like you made it past the first 3 weeks where you didn't have enough roots, the plant dies, and then you made it to weeks 4, 5, or 6, and you come in and you tell me everything's dead, I will tell you it's because your duct blew out. Because if you made it to week 4 or 5 of flower, you're good. Yeah. I know you know what you're doing.
Seedling. Whether cultivated indoors or outdoors, hydroponically or in soil, cannabis requires light, air, water, nutrients, a growing medium, and heat to manufacture food and to grow. For optimum growth, the light must be of the proper spectrum, intensity, and duration. Air must be warm, arid, and rich in carbon dioxide. Water must be abundant, but not excessive. And the growing medium must contain the proper levels of nutrients. In this DVD, relying on my decades of experience, both as a writer and grower, I'll teach you how to manage these processes and keep your garden productive, efficient, and green. In nature, cannabis is an annual plant, completing its life cycle in 1 year. A seed planted in the spring will grow strong and tall through the summer and flower in the fall. The annual cycle starts all over again when the seeds sprout the following year and includes 4 distinct growth stages. During germination, moisture, heat, and air activate hormones within the durable outer coating of the seed. Soon, the seed's coating splits, a rootlet grows downward, and a sprout with seed leaves pushes upward in search of light. The tiny seed will have to develop into a self-sufficient seedling quickly if it expects to flourish in the outside world. Seedlings require 16 to 18 hours of light to maintain strong, healthy growth. Vegetative growth lasts from the moment a clone or seedling takes root until that same plant matures enough to begin producing buds. Cannabis plants will remain in this vegetative state for as long as they receive 16 to 24 hours of light per day. Cannabis flowers when the days become shorter and plants are signaled that the annual life cycle is coming to an end. This occurs naturally outdoors in the autumn, but must be regulated indoors by the grower. Flowering is triggered by giving plants 12 hours of uninterrupted darkness and 12 hours of light. When fertilized with male pollen, female flowers will produce seeds at this point in the life cycle. But left unpollinated, a seedless or Sinsemilla crop will grow. Later in the DVD, I'll explain Sinsemilla growing along with other basic techniques growers use to increase the yield and efficiency in their gardens, including a process called cloning, which guarantees all your plants will be females. Also, we'll show you the best methods for taking your fully grown buds through the harvesting process of cutting, trimming, drying, and curing that will ensure the grass that you grow in your own garden can compete with the best smoke in the world.
Invest a day of your time, a little bit of money, and you can grow buds just like this. Hi, how you doing today? I brought you into this little garden that was put together by a grower in a single day. It can also be taken down in less than a day if need be. You can make a garden just like this one and put it together just like this grower did in one single day. Come with me and find out how. Here we are inside of an 8x8 grow room, or what's about to be. What we've done is we've framed up the bottom with 2x3s, and we'll build a complete 8x8 grow room right in front of you.
The best location for a grow room is in an obscure corner of the basement, where it's easy to maintain a constant temperature year-round. Basements are well insulated by concrete walls and soil. An attic is also a good location, except for the possible heat buildup. Few people venture into an attic that is difficult to access. Outbuildings, garages, and barns not attached to homes are some of the worst places to grow cannabis. Security is much easier to maintain when the garden is within the home. Productive growers have two distinct rooms within their grow operation: a vegetative cloning room and a much larger room for flowering plants. As the Trailer Park Boys from Canada can tell you, some of the best pot in the world grows in trailers.
I want my kitty. Frig off, Bubbles. You gave me the cat. I didn't say you could keep him, and I don't want him living in a fucking car. Bubbles, you've got tons of cats. Let me keep. He was a loner. I loaned him to you. Well, I need him. Look at my weed plants. One of them's dead. I don't give a flying fuck. I didn't never said you could keep him. What the hell you doing? Wake me up so early. No cat of mine's gonna live in a car. Julian? What, you guys shut up? Ricky won't give me my kitty. Ricky, give him his cat. It's my cat now. I don't care. Give him his cat. Look, see that? You know why that plant's dead? Because a squirrel peed in it. That's why I need the cat. It protects my weed plants. I've got 4 plants left, guys. It's all I got left in my life. Please, let me have one cat to protect my plants.
Okay, I'm framing up a little grow room. Most people won't have to go to this extent, but they'll have to have something similar. So we're building, basically, a mock grow room. Walk up. Okay, now. Let's measure in between these studs. We're just doing this approximately. And watch the dreadlocks. They can get caught up. I'm putting this on here just to stabilize this stuff. 31 inches. Just quite a bit sturdier than it was before, yeah? And we're ready to start mounting the vent fan.
Fresh air is essential in all gardens. Outdoor air is abundant and packed with carbon dioxide, necessary for plant life. Indoor gardens must be meticulously controlled to replicate the outdoor atmosphere.
Air should be able to be evacuated from the room, the entire room, in less than 5 minutes. That means we've got to have an entry for the air and an exit for the air.
Vent fans are rated in the amount of air measured in cubic feet per minute they are able to move.
Okay, let's understand why we need to evacuate so much air and keep the air flowing through a room.
A 10-foot square garden will use from 10 to 50 gallons or more of water every week. Plants transpire most of this water into the air, and if it is left in the grow room, humidity eventually increases to 100%, which causes growth to screech to a halt. It also opens the door for pest and disease attacks.
Even if your grow room is in a small closet, you're going to need a vent fan. Right here we've got several different kinds of fans. We've got the propeller fan, which is the inline fan. I like these real well. They're not the most expensive fan, but they work and they work well. Next is the inline fan. What they have is an impeller inside, and this moves air through a duct at a high speed. These things are quiet, well balanced, and I love them. Next is the blower. This is called a squirrel cage blower because it looks like a squirrel cage and it blows out one end. They do move a heck of a lot of air quickly. These are little muffin fans, or computer fans I call them. They move quite a bit of air. They're small, they don't make a lot of noise, but you definitely can't get by with just one. And all of these are vent fans. They move the air from inside the room to outside the room.
To install, run the duct the shortest possible distance and keep curves to a minimum.
Well, this 6-inch ducting comes about 6 feet through this plastic PVC wall, turns the corner, and goes right into this hole here in the chimney. First, it's cleaned with a charcoal filter, then it's vented out this chimney. One of the problems you run into in an indoor grow room is smell.
A good exhaust fan, vented outdoors, is the easiest way to keep the house from reeking of fresh marijuana. A deodorizing liquid, ozone generator, activated charcoal filter, or a combination of these will solve fragrance problems.
This particular one, fits in a 12-inch duct. You just put this in your ducting, it treats the air, takes out all the smell before it's expelled. And these charcoal filters are great. Around the outside is carbon, and on top of the carbon is a dust filter. The carbon actually absorbs the fragrance of cannabis.
Some grow rooms have sufficient air coming in via cracks and holes, but the majority require air to be ushered in with the help of an intake fan.
Over here, this is what I've been waiting to see. This hole right here is a hole that comes in, and it's for new air. This is a key place for a thermometer and a barometer. If the air comes into the room too cold, say lower than 60 degrees, you're going to have problems. It's going to make your plants feel bad. We don't want them to feel bad now, do we? Other key places for thermometers and barometers are at the level of the plants and higher in the room. So easily it could be 10 degrees cooler at the floor than it is at the ceiling. This 10 degrees will cost you ounces of bud.
The ideal temperature range for indoor growth is 72 to 76 degrees Fahrenheit. The ideal thermometer is a day-night or maximum minimum type that measures how low the temperature dips at night or how high it reaches during the day. At night, the temperature can drop 5 to 10 degrees with little noticeable effect on growth rate. The temperature should not drop more than 15 degrees Fahrenheit, or excessive humidity and mold might become problems.
Look at the tips, the fringe of this plant here. They're transpiring to keep cool. If they're having trouble staying cool, you're going to see this outward edge of the plant turning up like this. If the temperature lowered just a little bit, then this would go away. And it also means you're going to need to water this garden every day just to keep it cool.
Relative humidity is the ratio between the amount of moisture in the air and the greatest amount of moisture the air could hold at the same temperature.
The higher the temperature, the more moisture the air can hold. The lower the temperature, the less moisture the air can hold. When the temperature drops, the humidity rises. It's that simple.
Measure relative humidity with a hygrometer, an extremely important instrument that will save you in your garden much frustration and fungus.
What we've got is 52% humidity in this grow room right now, which is an excellent humidity level for this to stay. Ideally, we'd like to have approximately 50% humidity during flowering and approximately 60 to 65% during vegetative growth.
Humidity can be increased with a humidifier by spraying water into the air or by letting a bucket of water evaporate in the room, and can be decreased with a dehumidifier.
Circulating the air within the room is incredibly important. The leaf can use all of the carbon dioxide in the zone right around it. And CO2 works for plants just like oxygen works for people. Well, what that means is the more CO2 you give a plant, the faster they'll grow. They can use 5 times more CO2 than naturally occurs in the air. It's very funny, but this little area here can have all kinds of carbon dioxide around it, and then within a short time, all of that carbon dioxide is used, and if it's not fluttering, moving, no new air comes in to replace that carbon dioxide. What we have here is a wall-mounted oscillating fan. It looks like about an 18-inch fan, and what it does is it oscillates or turns back and forth and supplies circulation air around the room. And notice it's just above the canopy of the plants. You need a minimum of 1 fan like this for every 100 square feet or 10 by 10 room, but preferably you could use 2 or 3. Now if we take a look at this clone here, Just last week, the grower came in and stripped all the lower leaves off of it. The smaller buds down here really weren't getting very much light because the canopy is so dense. So it really didn't produce very much dope down here. The ventilation moves up through the plants like this and aerates everything from the top and the side, so it really lowers the probability of a fungal disease, and it also makes life pretty tough for spider mites, which are one of the biggest pests in the garden. And then the third thing is you can look under the garden and see exactly what's going on, so you can tell if there's any problems down here. Always make sure to have plastic blades on your fan, because when you put your finger in them, it won't hurt as much. Also, I like to have a shroud around this that protects you, because when you back into the damn thing, it's spooky, and it just might hurt you as well. It's a lot of fun to play with, but other than that, here in this high-tech grow room, what the growers decided to do is introduce carbon dioxide. But what this grower has is carbon dioxide that's built in a pressurized tank, just like a welding tank, and it comes through and it's dispersed out this tube here. He's taken the fans and put them over here at this level to blow the CO2 back this way, and another fan down low to blow it back up. What I've got here is an incredibly efficient inline fan with a 12-inch duct on it. This is the intake, and this is the exhaust out this way. This I'm going to exhaust straight out the back of the room. What I'll do is I'll take this fan, put it right here in this hole where it's secure. There. Now that'll kind of hold it in place. I'll slide this 2x3 over the fan. This keeps the air from leaking in and the light from leaking out. Duct tape solves all your problems. And we do that just like this. Put it in right around here, pack it in, and at nighttime, what I'll do is I'll go outside and take a look at this and see if there's any light leaking out around it. Okay? Since we have the duct tape handy, I always like to secure my wires everywhere, because this way you're not falling over anything. On this side, we've got black visqueen plastic, but on the other side, it's white and reflective. This is the white visqueen plastic that's along the wall. It'll protect the wall, and as well, it provides reflection. And the floor is also white visqueen plastic, which will protect the carpet. But all I'm doing is taking this roll, rolling it around the room like this, and measuring approximately how much I'll need. Make a little bit longer piece, and then I'll just cut it down like this. Try to keep it as straight as possible. Now we want the white to the inside and the dark to the outside. So just tack this up right here, quick and easy. Put a couple staples in it. And then I'll tack it up several places around up high. Staple it in. I just take my scissors and cut right down this way. So this goes right around here. Watch your fingers. Don't want to smoke too many joints, and staple your fingers to the wall. Okay, that's our last one. Now I'm just going to go through again and staple all of this and do these here. And then I'll put a couple more. Let's see. Well, now our walls are in place. It's a simple PVC plastic. I've put duct tape here so I can run the staples through them, and the staples will not pull out this way, or they're much more difficult to pull out. Gives us a lot more strength. Then I put a few other staples here just to tack it down. Now our next step is going to be to hang all of our electrical appliances right on this wall here. Hey, I've got an idea. Let's talk about a few lights. There's several lights here that I'd like to introduce you to. We've got the 400 watt metal halide here. This is called a compact fluorescent lamp. This one And this one are high-pressure sodium 600-watt lamps. And the lamp over here is a high-pressure sodium 1,000 watts. Right here, we have a 250-watt high-pressure sodium lamp. Notice the arc tube is long. Next to it is a 250-watt high-pressure metal halide lamp. Notice the arc tube is short and fat. The most efficient is the 600-watt high-pressure sodium lamp. It's got a higher lumen per watt conversion than any other HID lamp. The lumen per watt conversion is the amount of lumens that are produced per watt of electricity. If we pay 10 cents for a kilowatt hour, and a kilowatt hour is 1,000 watts that burns for an hour, well, we get 140 lumens from a high pressure sodium, we get 120 lumens from a metal halide, and we get 100 lumens from a compact fluorescent. As you can see, we get much more light from a high pressure sodium than we do from a compact fluorescent, and we pay the same amount of money. This is an important factor to consider when you purchase lights. This is one of the largest wattages. It's a 1,000-watt high-pressure sodium lamp. Here is the metal halide, 1,000 watt. This has the longest arc tube of all of the metal halides.
For most growers, I recommend a 400 or 600-watt bulb. That's because they can be placed closer to the canopy of the garden. But you'll have to do some research to determine the right kind of light to suit your needs.
We've discussed several types of lighting now. We've got the metal halide, the compact fluorescent, and the high-pressure sodium. The metal halide and the compact fluorescent produce a light that's very similar, or a spectrum of light that's very similar to natural sunlight, and the high-pressure sodium produce a light that's more like the harvest sun, and it's a bit yellow in color.
The closer marijuana is to a light source, the better it grows, as long as it's not so close that heat from the lamp burns foliage.
A good question is, how do you know what's too close and what's too far away? What's a good rule of thumb to tell? Well, the easiest way to tell is to hold your hand under here. Light fades quite quickly, and it fades to the square of the distance. So all you have to do is move that lamp a little bit closer, and you get a lot more efficient use of your light. If I put my hand down here about 18 inches away, it feels fine and I have no trouble whatsoever. So that's a real good barometer, and that's where these plants are now, at 18 inches. Over here on the side, they've come up, but they're still about 18 inches away from the actual light. And here we have a large light hood or reflector with a 400-watt lamp inside. This 400-watt lamp is not nearly as hot as the 1,000-watt lamp, and I can put my hand about 4 inches underneath the arc tube, and it's not as hot as it was with 1,000-watt lamp when my hand was a foot underneath the arc tube. Another way to tell if your plants are too hot is to hold a thermometer under there. Then you can tell exactly how hot it is. We've got 8 feet by 8 feet. If we want to use the entire room for growing, we would put one light here, one light here, one here, and one here. And notice that the growth is fairly even all the way across the entire crop, which is a very good thing. That's what you want to do, is keep the canopy approximately even.
Nearly all stationary lamps have a bright or hot spot that plants grow toward. Yield is increased by giving the growing area uniform light distribution. Rotate plants every day or two by giving them 1/4 to 1/2 turn. Also, move smaller plants toward the center and taller plants toward the outside of the garden. The small plants should be set on a stand to even out the garden canopy.
Spreading the light all depends on the reflective hood that you've got.
Adding the proper reflective hood over your lamp can double growing area, which means growers who use the most efficient reflective hoods harvest up to twice as much as those who don't.
There's all kinds of reflectors. Everybody says they have the best one, but what are the principles that work best? A few things I'd like to say to begin with. One is a hard or a shiny white is going to create hot spots. Any folds or bends in the reflector are going to create hot spots. Mirror images will also create hot spots. The best reflective surface is either a dull or a matte finish or a pebble finish that's a pounded hammer finish. It could be an aluminum color or a silver or a white. It's all about the same. Titanium white's going to be the brightest.
Aluminum foil is one of the worst possible reflective surfaces. The foil crinkles up and reflects light at oblique angles.
Well, Ricky's got the whole place wrapped in tinfoil, like everything. That's the sink under there. Can't even use it. He's been going around the park to people like Mrs. Peterson, asking to borrow tinfoil for different things he says he's cooking and whatnot. All fibs, he's telling.
The shape should be, well, in a horizontal reflector, it should be a double parabolic with the bulb right in the middle. If it's a vertical lamp, it should be a great big parabolic dome like this. And we'll see examples of both. This parabolic dome reflector is not necessarily the most efficient reflector, but nonetheless it spreads light very evenly throughout the grow room, and it's an excellent reflector to use for vegetative growth, because during vegetative growth stage they do not need as much light. Here we've got a 400-watt metal halide underneath. It's called a cone hood, and this hood is one of the most ineffective or inefficient hoods there is. If you have to use one, go ahead. If not, find something else, because you'll be smart and you'll spend less money over the long run if you use a parabolic over a cone hood.
Horizontal reflectors are the most efficient for HID systems and the best value for growers. A horizontal lamp yields up to 40% more light than a lamp burning in a vertical position. You can replicate the movement of the sun through the sky with a motorized light mover.
This lamp is moving back and forth about 4 feet. Well, normally this lamp would be 24 inches above the plants, but since it's moving and it's ventilated very well, it can be placed closer, and that's a very good use of your lamp. Also, if you wanted to work in here at night when it's dark, all you'd have to do is replace this with a green lamp, green light bulb, and you could work here no trouble at all, and it would not affect the photo period whatsoever. That's a real good tip, because many times people want to work in their room at night, but they're afraid to turn on the light. It's not a good idea to turn on the light, but a green light will make that all possible. Here's these duplex outlets. Here's a rheostat for a fan. Here's a humidistat to control humidity, and here's the thermostat to control temperature. So it's all contained in one place. Real simple technology. Anybody can put these up in just a few minutes. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to mount this board right up here, right on top of the plastic, so I've got good access to everything. Okay, now when I put this screw in, I want to put it in nice and slow so it comes all the way through and just barely touches my finger. If you put it in too fast, you're going to be screwed. The third screw and the fourth. Okay? It's too far. Oh no, we're fine. There. Now notice that the electricity comes right through the side of the wall. This is very, very convenient. So I pull my cord out here, plug in the fan, and then the lamp, which I'll mount right now, will be plugged in to this timer. The timer is very necessary to play the role of Mother Nature, because in the flowering room, we need to have 12 hours dark and 12 hours light. The timer will control this. A timer will also help control irrigation schedules, fan schedules, whatever you'd like. Don't start without having the appropriate timer. This 8x8 room could use 4 600-watt lamps. Now, what we've decided to do for the sake of demonstration is to hang one lamp, show you exactly how it's done, do a real nice job of it, and then let you decide how many lamps you'd like to hang yourself. What we have here is a 600-watt high-pressure sodium ballast. The ballast regulates the flow and the voltage of electricity. The electricity comes in through this heavy-duty grounded plug, transforms the energy into something that the lamp can use, and sends it out this cord here. Now this socket is just like your ordinary household socket, except it's much larger, and it's made from porcelain, and it's heavy duty. Now here's our bulb, 600-watt high-pressure sodium bulb. we put this bulb inside the mogul socket. This is a lightweight aluminum reflector that is easy to hang, but it's not so light that it will move around when the air blows. And that's where I'm going to mount it. Screw in, screw out. Now I've got a nice little hole started for my hook, and I'll just put this one in by hand. And I'll just tie a quick little granny knot here. You can use a square knot or a bowline, whatever you like, but there's no way that this is going to slip. Now, the next step is to hang the lamp. Now, I just run this cord over to the hook, make a little loop here, approximately where I want the lamp to be, and hook it there. Now, I'll leave a long tail on this that I can easily make more knots in or more loops in, but I can adjust the level of the lamp very easily now. I just put the bulb in and turn it. Okay, now right towards the end it gets a little difficult to turn, so what I'll do is I'll grab this mogul socket and turn the bulb another quarter of a turn. Remember to seat your bulb properly, make sure it's screwed all the way in so there's a contact at the bottom of the socket. Otherwise, the bulb won't start. And I just don't like any of this like oily fingerprints on the bulb. In fact, I think I'll wipe the entire bulb down. Always keep your bulbs clean. I've seen so many dirty bulbs, it's disgusting. And just a little bit of dirt will cut your light transmission by 5 to 10%. The bulb's in, it's tied off here. We can move it up and down the transformers outside the grow room, up on a shelf where it's safe. We don't like these on the floor because remember, the electricity goes above the waist and the water below the waist. Now, the timer can be set for 12 or 18 hours, even 24 hours if you'd like, depending upon what you're growing. 12 and 12 for flowering, 18 and 6, 18 hours of daylight, 6 hours of darkness for vegetative growth, or you can even run it at 24 hours a day for vegetative growth. Some people like that very well. And it always seems like we need something else. So always leave a little bit of extra room so you've got all of your controls in one place. That way you can take a quick visual inventory of everything and know exactly what's going on in your room. There. Fits perfectly.
Growing in inexpensive, readily available containers allows each plant to be cared for individually, including the water and nutrient regimen. Root, stick, and problem plants are easy to pull from the garden.
What this does is it gives you the ability to put the plants where you want them. And if they're planted in the ground, you don't have that ability.
Container preference is often a matter of convenience, cost, and availability.
The rule of thumb is to have approximately 1 gallon of container for each month that the plant's alive. Now this pot is a 3-gallon container. Okay, so what this means is this plant can grow in here easily for another couple of months, no problem. The reason these containers are normally black is so that the roots inside the container receive no light. This is very important. Roots cannot have light.
Growers prefer pots that are taller than they are wide because they allow the cannabis root system to penetrate deeply.
One of the first things we need to consider when we look at containers are the drainage holes. Drainage holes are incredibly important, and we have to have an adequate amount.
Containers should have at least 2 half-inch holes per square foot of bottom.
What we need to do is continually pour more water and nutrients on the top and let it drain out the bottom. The container should also have a saucer underneath to contain some of the runoff water. Now, if the water stays in the bottom, it'll rot the roots. It's that simple. Notice also that the plants are put in here about as tight as you can get them because they really do not need much space when they're small.
Huddle small, containerized plants tightly together under the brightest area below the HID lamp and move them further apart as they grow. In general, each 40-inch square space will hold from 16 to 32 plants.
Now let's look at growing mediums. There's two basic kinds of growing mediums. First is a soilless mix. This is a medium that does not have any elements in it that will react with the plant. So you can fertilize it, and that's it. You have complete control. This is what hydroponic gardens use.
Soilless mixes are inexpensive, lightweight, and sterile growing mediums.
You've got rock wool, which is spun rock fiber. You've got coconut husks that have been cleaned up and pressed together. And then you've got something like this, which is a mix of several components, mainly perlite and peat moss.
Texture of soilless mixes should be coarse, light, and spongy to allow drainage and sufficient moisture and air retention.
The next type is an organic medium. Many people prefer organic soil. I like organic soil real well, but I have to be careful with it just like you should. So if you're a new grower, first-time grower, I would suggest that you try a simple soilless mix that holds water evenly and drains well.
The pH scale from 1 to 14 measures acid to alkaline balance. 1 is most acidic, 7 is neutral, and 14 most alkaline. Cannabis flourishes when the pH is between 6.5 and 7. Hydroponic solutions perform best with a slightly lower pH range, from 5.8 to 6.8. Measure the pH with a soil test kit, litmus paper, or electronic pH tester. Accurate measurement and control is essential in a strong, healthy garden.
Here's a dynamic example of pH and why you should control it. Notice that these little plants are all yellow. Well, the reason they're yellow is because the pH is too low, and since the pH is too low, the nitrogen is locked out. That's why they're yellow.
The easiest way to stabilize the pH of the soil that's too acidic is to mix 1 cup of fine dolomite lime per cubic foot of soil. The easiest way to stabilize soil pH that's too base is to add a fertilizer that contains sulfur. Ideally, soil temperature should range between 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
If it starts getting up to 75 degrees, you're going to have problems. You're going to have a lot more insect trouble, and you're going to have fungus problems and basically rot.
Soil amendments increase the soil's air, water, and nutrient-containing ability. Mineral amendments are near neutral on the pH scale and contain few, if any, available nutrients. Organic soil amendments contain carbon and break down through bacterial activity. To improve drainage, mix 10 to 20% coarse perlite into soilless mix before planting.
These are a little dry, and so we can pull this out right here and take a look at the root mass down here. They're a little bit dry, but this plant's 9 months old, and the good part is it's not quite pot bound. We can look at the bottom here, and we can see some thin roots, but it looks all right. It looks all right. This plant can grow for another couple of months and do just fine. When you throw your garbage out, you want to make sure that there's no telltale signs of growing. Conceal everything. Take the plants, grind them up, compost them, take the stems, grind them up, and remove them from your property. Any type of signal to the police, because remember, they can go through your garbage. I've taken 16 pots and put them at equidistance underneath the lamp in a 4x4 quadrant. Got the sunshine mix right here. Let's bring it into the grow room and set it down. Let's just start filling these up, and notice some of the soil will come out the bottom, or soilless mix will come out the bottom, but that's okay. With just a little bit of care, we can keep the mess to a minimum. I'll finish filling these pots up and put them on the saucers right there. Now we've got our reservoir that I'm bringing in. Now notice that I always keep a top on a reservoir. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first and foremost is so that the water will not evaporate, because if it evaporates, it'll bring more humidity to our room, and we don't need that. Second reason that we keep this covered is so that nothing falls in it. Got a little container in here, a little watering can. It's the only one we could find, so don't laugh.
As long as the drainage is good, it's difficult to overwater fast-growing cannabis. Gently break up and cultivate the top half-inch of soil surface with your fingers to allow water to penetrate evenly and guard against dry soil pockets. Irrigate soil in soilless mixes when they are dry 1/2 inch below the soil surface. Use plenty of water and allow at least 10% runoff during each watering. The concentration of calcium and magnesium indicate the hardness of your water. Water containing 100 to 150 milligrams of calcium per liter is acceptable to grow marijuana. Reverse osmosis machines are the easiest and most efficient means to clean raw water. A reverse osmosis machine uses small semi-permeable membranes that allow pure water to pass through and filter out the dissolved solids from the water.
And that's what we use to give the plants, because that water is much easier to deal with.
Nutrients are elements that a plant needs to live. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are absorbed from the air and the water. Other nutrients are absorbed from the growing medium and nutrient solution. Supplemental nutrients supplied in the form of a fertilizer allow marijuana to reach its maximum potential.
You're going to spend a lot of money on different fertilizers. Pay attention, look closely. Fertilizers help you, but at the same time, they're expensive. Basically, you need two kinds of fertilizer when you're growing marijuana. One for vegetative growth, which is a high nitrogen fertilizer. Later, when you change the photo period, you want to change your fertilizer to a flowering fertilizer. So you want to have a low nitrogen and a high potassium and a high phosphorus. And of course, you have to use a micronutrient. In this case, it's Flora Micro. And you can also get a hard water formula and a regular or a soft water formula.
If plants are growing well and have deep green, healthy leaves, they are probably getting enough nutrients. The moment growth slows or leaves begin to turn pale green, it is time to fertilize.
These plants have been flowering 8.5 weeks, and we'll notice what they look like. All of the leaves, the large fan leaves or small water leaves around the outside of the bud, are turning yellow. This is from lack of nitrogen.
Experimenting on 2 or 3 test plants is the best way to gain experience and develop your horticultural skills. Give the test plants some fertilizer and see if they green up and grow faster. You should notice a change within 3 or 4 days.
Well, if your plants are thirsty, they may care for a little bit of tea. That's organic tea. And this pillowcase is full of llama manure and sheep manure. And this stuff is a great mix for vegetative growth. So what happens is this is soaked in here for several days, and then the water is used as fertilizer. Great stuff, and they can put it on really heavy. Now for flowering, what this grower will do is use llama manure and bat guano. Different mix, it's got a high phosphorus content and potassium as well. Works great for flowering. Okay, there's a 2,000 gallon an hour pump, and he just hooks on the garden hose to it here, and on the other end he's got this water wand with an on-off valve, and he waters away. And at the other end of this water wand is a breaker head, and this breaker head mixes water and air together. It aerates the water just before it's applied to the plants.
Hydroponics is the science of growing plants without soil. Hydroponic gardening can be more productive than soil gardening, but it's not nearly as forgiving. Soil works as a buffer for nutrients and holds them longer than inert hydroponic growing mediums. Inert soilless hydroponic mediums contain essentially no nutrients. All the nutrients are supplied via nutrient solution. Contrary to popular belief, hydroponic gardens often require more care than soil gardens because plants grow faster. There are more things to check, and there are more things to go wrong. Hydroponic systems are distinguished by the way nutrient solution is applied. Passive systems have no moving parts, so seldom does anything break or malfunction. Passive systems rely on capillary action to transfer nutrient solution from the reservoir to the growing medium. Absorbent growing mediums such as vermiculite and peat moss are ideal for passive systems. Low initial cost and low maintenance are the main reasons growers choose passive systems. Active hydroponic systems actively move the nutrient solution. Examples of active systems include flood and drain, nutrient film technique, and top feed. Active recovery systems use growing mediums that drain rapidly and hold plenty of air, such as expanded clay, humus rock, rock wool, and coconut fiber. Ebb and flow, or flood and drain hydroponic systems, have proven track records as low-maintenance, easy-to-use gardens. Individual plants in pots or rock wool cubes are set up on a special table called a growing bed that can hold 1 to 4 inches of nutrient solution. Nutrient solution is pumped onto the table or growing bed, flooding the medium from the bottom up, while also pushing out oxygen-poor air. Once the nutrient solution reaches a set level, an overflow pipe drains the excess water to the reservoir. In top-feed hydroponic systems, nutrient solution is metered out in specific doses and delivered via spaghetti tubing or an emitter placed at the base of individual plants. Aerated nutrient solution flows into the growing medium where it is taken up by roots. The runoff nutrient solution is directed back to the reservoir as soon as it drains from the growing medium. Rock wool, coconut fiber, and expanded clay are the most common growing mediums found in top-feed systems. NFT hydroponic systems supply aerated nutrient solution to roots located in gullies. Seedlings or cuttings with a strong root system are placed on capillary matting located on the bottom of covered channel. Constantly aerated nutrient solution flows down the channel or gully, over and around the roots and back to the reservoir. Only growers with several years' experience should try an NFT system. Growing in deep water culture is simple, easy, and productive. Seedlings and clones are held in net pots full of expanded clay pellets, rock wool, or other growing mediums. The net pots are nestled in holes in a lid that covers the reservoir, while the roots of seedlings and cuttings dangle down into the nutrient solution. A submersible pump lifts nutrient solution to the top of a discharge tube where it splashes into the access lid. Nutrient solution cascades down, wetting roots and splashing into the self-contained reservoir below. Aeroponic systems use no growing medium and offer the highest performance possible. Roots are suspended in a dark growth chamber without growing medium where they are misted with oxygen-rich nutrient solution at regular intervals. Aeroponic systems require greater attention to detail. There is no growing medium to act as a water nutrient bank, which makes the system delicate and touchy to use. If the pump fails, roots soon dry and plants suffer.
And I just water this soilless mix and water the hell out of it because it's totally dry and it can take quite a bit of water. This pot can hold all the water in this container. In fact, I could even just pour it out like this. And as soon as we see water coming out the bottom, we know that we've saturated everything. And make sure it gets completely wet the first time. That's very, very important because if it doesn't get completely wet, there'll be dry soil pockets that won't hold fertilizer and the roots will not grow in there. And what I like to do to water things is give everything a little bit of water at first and then go around and water it again. That gives the water time to soak in. If you've got any problem with wetting your soil, the easiest thing to do is to add a few drops of dish soap, biodegradable dish soap in here. And that will make the water wetter and it will penetrate the soil more quickly. Except for these two walls, we have a fully functioning grow room now. We've framed everything up. We've put the walls up, the white visqueen plastic. We added our vent fan up here so it vents off the hot air. We've put our board here to mount everything we need electrical on it. Our power strip, our lamp and timer, our fan up here that will be on 24 hours a day, and our thermometer and hygrometer. Now, we've also got our lamp hung, and notice it's nice and even. We've got an adjustable cord that goes from here to the hook here, 16 pots here in a 4x4 quadrant. We're not going to grow any plants because it's a bad idea given our legal situation. What we've done to show you plants is to go around to different clandestine grow rooms and take our photos there so that we will not break the law. We're simple reporters.
Seeds result from sexual propagation and contain genes from both parent plants, male and female. The genetics contained within the seed will dictate the resulting plant size, disease and pest resistance, root, stem, leaf, and flower production, cannabinoid level, and many other vital traits. Strong seeds produce healthy plants and heavy harvests.
If it weren't for the seed companies here in Vancouver and BC, we wouldn't have been able to have access to so many different grow rooms. They really helped us out a lot, and I'd like to go through and thank each and every one of them personally. First, I'd like to start with Kind Seeds, who was nice enough to loan us quite a few things and get us into a lot of different grow rooms. The next is Reeferman Seeds, and he's done incredible things. He really helped us out. We have Next Generation Seed Company, Vancouver Island Seeds, Liberty Seeds, and then there's Legend Seeds. They helped us get into several different places. And DJ Short, creator of Blueberry. And the last one is Chimera Seeds. The seeds you can see here in front of us, and we're fortunate enough to have Chimera here today. Hey Chimera, how you doing?
Pretty good, how are you doing?
Great, great. What makes a good seed?
Well, generally just the basic is you want a good seed that's hard and dark. And you take it, you pick it up between your fingers, and you squeeze it. If it breaks, it's not a good seed. It's generally not going to be viable.
Here's a shot of hash plant. Notice the seeds are just about ripe. Let me pull one of these out. Nice, solid, dark seed. Definitely ripe. That's a viable seed right now. This one is still growing and it's developing.
This simple illustration of a seed reveals an embryo containing a gene and a supply of food, wrapped in a protective outer coating. Mature seeds that are hard, beige, dark brown, and spotted or mottled have the highest germination rate. Soft, pale, or green seeds are usually immature and should be avoided.
These seeds right here in my hand,
yeah, they're very light colored, they don't weigh very much, and when you squeeze them between your fingers, they just snap.
oh yeah, that could easily be good.
Store seeds in a cool, dark, dry place and make sure to label containers. Some seeds will remain viable for 5 years or longer when properly stored.
Once you get a seed, once you order the seed and it comes to you, what's next? What do you do with that seed?
Well, you want to get the seed into a position where it's able to grow, and that means giving it enough water so that the plant can take it into the embryo and start dividing its cells and growing into a new plant. You can soak it in a glass of water,
Okay.
allow the cells to soften a little bit and give the plant a little kickstart into life, and then they can either be planted in a paper towel or placed directly into the growing medium.
Soaking seeds in water allows moisture to penetrate the protective seed shell. Common household water contains enough dissolved solids to nurture seeds through their first few weeks of life.
For a viable seed, generally you want to find something that will sink in water.
Cannabis seeds need only water, heat, and air to germinate. They do not need fertilizer, extra hormones, or any light. Properly nurtured, seeds will germinate in 2 to 7 days in temperatures from 70 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. During germination, the outside protective shell of the seed splits, and a tiny white sprout called the root or taproot pops out. Next, cotyledon or seed leaves emerge from within the shell as they push upward in search of light.
This is a germinated seed right there with the root about an inch long on it. This has been germinated for 2 to 3 days, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this very carefully, very tenderly with my fingers like this. I actually could use tweezers that are very delicate, and then I'll take this and carefully put it into this hole here, a pre-drilled hole, and set it down like that. Push it down. Notice my fingers down about 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm pushing the top in. So now this seed is in really good contact with the rock wool cubes here.
Plant seeds twice as deep as the width of the seed and use a medium such as ProMix, which allows adequate airflow. Cannabis seeds grow best at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Once germinated, move seedlings to a slightly cooler growing area and increase light levels.
These tall, thin plants here were a seed exactly 1 week ago. And this one here, the last to germinate, has the cotyledon or seed leaves on it. In a few days, it will develop true leaves, which are the serrated leaves with the veins in them.
During seedling growth, a root system develops rapidly, while green, above-ground growth remains slow. The new, fragile root system requires a small but constant supply of water and warmth. Too much water will drown roots and often leads to root rot. Lack of water will cause the infant root system to dry up.
Underneath the tray is a heating mat, and this heating mat heats the growing medium so it's a little warmer, and if the growing medium stays a few degrees warmer, the roots will grow faster. Well, here I am in a breeding house or a house full of seedlings.
Seedlings require at least 16 hours of light daily and require less intense light than they will need at later stages. If you order 10 seeds and germinate them immediately, expect that only 2 or 3 will grow into strong super females. The rest will be male, weak, or not germinate at all. As the seedlings mature, cull any sickly, weak plants and focus attention on the remaining strong survivors. One will be more robust and potent than her siblings, and therefore be selected as the mother of countless super clones. I'll explain more in detail about cloning in a few minutes.
Seeds are available everywhere. You can find them advertised in High Times magazine. You can find them on the internet. Just type in cannabis seeds and you'll see hundreds of seed companies show up.
Let's have a puff of this joint before we go.
I was hoping you'd ask. Let me see. Here's a lighter. Let's fire this spliff up. Oh yeah. Well, Chimera, I'd like to say thank you very much for this joint, and thanks so much for showing up and teaching us all about seeds.
Anytime, my friend, anytime.
I'll pass this back. Okay, here we are on Vancouver Island, and we're going to make clones. Well, the first thing we're going to do is take this chopstick, and I'll make a small hole right in the middle here. And the hole goes about half as deep as the container is. This will allow extra space for the roots to grow. Here we have an inexpensive rooting gel that we can purchase at most any nursery. So what I'm going to do is take some of this rooting hormone, and I'll pour it in a jar here. Notice I've got a fresh razor blade that I've just taken out of the cardboard, and we'll move over here and take a cutting. These plants are in the vegetative growth stage and they're mother plants. Mother plants are female plants that we know are female that we take cuttings from, and we'll show you about that. What I'm doing is making a cut here at the 4th node, 4 nodes down, or 4 branches down from the top. And I'm making the cut on a 45-degree angle, and I made the cut on the 45-degree angle so there'll be a little bit more surface area here at the base of the stem for roots to initiate. Now what I need to do is trim off a couple of branches, and notice I'm trimming it off so that there's no extra little spurs here on the plant. Now, roots will initiate out of each one of these cuts and out of the bottom. So what I do next is I'll take this, smear it around a little bit in this root-inducing gel. I'll take this hormone-coated stem and place it down in the soil, and careful not to let any of that root-inducing hormone fall off, okay? And then I backfill so that the soil comes in good contact with the stem. Let's do another one here. This one, I'll go down just the 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes, make a 45-degree angle cut, trim off a couple of branches and leaves so there's no little spurs or anything to rot underneath the soil line. And I'll do the second one here. And remember, roots will initiate out of any cuts. I just put a little bit in here because we're only going to do a half a dozen. And once I use this hormone, I don't want to put it back in the container because it could contaminate it. Now I've got root-inducing hormone all over the stem. I carefully set it down into the soil and backfill around it. Make sure, and you can push it pretty hard down to make sure that there's good contact with the soil. One of the things that we have to be concerned with is when we cut a tip of a plant off, there's no root system to supply water to the leaves. So what we're going to do is mist the top of these plants, or mist them a little bit, so there's some water on the leaves, so they have a little bit of humidity around them, and they don't dry out real fast. Because as soon as we're done here, we're going to put these under a humidity dome. And roots will start on this plant within the next 7 days, and within 14 days, there'll be a complete root system, and this should be ready to transplant. There's all kinds of mediums that you can take cuttings in. One of them is rock wool. Another one that people like very well is Oasis cubes. There's Jiffy peat pellets. Sunshine cutting mix, coconut husks also work very, very well. So it pretty much depends upon what you're comfortable with and what you like to use. So what I've done here is I placed this little cutting into a rock wool cube, and the rock wool has been soaked for 24 hours in a solution with a pH of 6, because that's the pH that roots grow best at. I stuck it in a pre-drilled hole that's about this deep, and that's how long the stem is within this cube. And that gives the roots plenty of room to grow down below. Now, at this point, I'm going to take this cutting and put it right over here with the other ones. And it's sitting on a bed of perlite, this white fluffy perlite that lets the water drain out but still holds moisture really well in between the pieces of perlite, and it creates a nice humid little environment. Right after this, what I'm going to do is I'll take one of these domes and place over the top of all of these cuttings here. What the dome does is it retains humidity within and around the plant. This is incredibly important for the first 3 days, that it has humidity of approximately 95 to 100%. Touch the top of the surface, make sure it's evenly moist. Pick one up occasionally, squeeze it, see if there's any water in there. If there's a little bit of water, fine, no problem. But moisture levels are very critical at this point. You want to pay very, very close attention to that. See, these humidity domes will keep the plants alive during the first 3 to 4 days after taking the cuttings. And these lights are 30-watt T12 daylight fluorescence. So it's very, very simple light that you can find just about anywhere. These little cuttings have been taken 18 days ago, and as we can see, they've already developed roots. I'm just going to lift this flat up and show you what these roots look like. They're mixed with perlite, but we've got some incredibly strong, vivacious roots. And one of the ways you can tell roots are very strong and healthy is that they're not brown, they're not discolored at all, they're bright white. It's a good one. Okay, here, let me pull this plant out and show you what a good set of roots look like. This plant is ready to transplant. It's got long, strong roots that are very, very healthy. Many people transplant the plants when there's not enough root mass on it. Like this, there's not quite enough roots. Well, notice this one's got quite a few more roots. This is the good plant to transplant. This one, I would wait 3 or 4 more days until it grows a few more roots, because once we transplant this into the vegetative growth room, into a larger pot, we're gonna push the heck out of it, and we want it to grow as fast as possible, and a lot of roots are what we need.
Once a seedling establishes a strong root system and foliage growth increases rapidly, it will enter the vegetative growth stage.
The hero returns. I cannot thank you enough for saving young
Vegetative growth
Imana
is
Lane's
maintained
life.
with 16
Aye,
hours
aye,
or
he
more
told
of
me
light.
everything.
Marijuana will continue
I've
vegetative
also
growth
received
for a
letters
year or
from both
longer,
House of
theoretically
Isle and
forever,
Durandale
as long as this
praising
photoperiod
your
is
conduct.
maintained. At
And
this
that of
point,
House
water and
Forton.
nutrients will be
You've
used
won.
more quickly, including nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus,
My
calcium,
lord.
magnesium, sulfur, and other trace
What is
elements.
it? Speak.
This room here
Pray
is
forgive the
the
intrusion, my
vegetative
lord,
room,
but I
or the
bring
mother
grave
room, and the clone room. And the light's
Master
on
Alphinaud and
18
Mistress
hours a
Takara
day,
have been detained
and
on
it's off
suspicion of
6
protecting
hours a
heresy.
day. And what that does is it makes it possible for plants to continue in a vegetative stage rather than a
They were
flowering
observed
stage.
entering a tavern in the
Pre-flowers
lower
grow
levels
at about
on
the
some
4th week of
half-dozen
vegetative
occasions.
growth.
There,
This is the
it
first
claimed
sign
they
a
made
plant
enough
is preparing for flowering.
inquiries
As soon
which
as this
brought them into
plant
contact
designates
with
sex,
certain
it will show either
elements.
the pollen sac
was this which
with the
prompted a
small
knight of the
nub
heavens
below
ward
it,
to demand that
or
they be
2
questioned.
hairy
Sir
white
Gritter,
female
my lord.
pistils. But they'll show up in this
Sir
area
Gritter was a
here,
brute.
approximately 3 to 4
Exceedingly
nodes
accomplished
from the
brute, but a
top of
brute
the plant.
nonetheless.
Here you see a
Alas, he is
single
also a
spike,
son of Houghton.
and on the end of it, the beginning of a little pollen sac. Now,
How
if this were a
quickly we
female
forget
plant,
the petty
you'd see
nature
2
of
little
men.
white hairs come out
I'd
of there.
wager your friends
This
are no
plant
more
is
than
just starting to
pawns in
show its
another
sex.
of my countrymen's
These are the
games.
first signs of a male plant. Notice the pollen sac that's growing from the inner node, where the leaf starts. Never let these pollen sacs open, because as soon as they do, they disperse pollen and they fertilize female plants. This is a full-fledged male. There's enough pollen right here in this one plant, this one plant, to fertilize all of the plants in this greenhouse. As you can see, there's little small pollen sacs, similar to, well, they kind of remind me of male testicles. The pollen will disperse into the air and land on the ripe, receptive female pistils. When the male pollen lands on one of these female pistils, these white little pistils, it slides down to the base, down inside the seed bracts, and at that point, a seed like this, right here, starts to develop. But at this point, the bud quits growing. All of the energy is put into seed production. And you just get a lot less resin and a lot less THC on plants that are seeded. Plus, half of the weight of the bud is seed. I don't care what the DEA says. You cannot get high on seeds. You can still clean the seeds out and smoke the pot. It's fine. But in general, we want to grow weed rather than seed. Let's grow Sinsemilla dope. That's what we want. Okay, once your plant gets big enough, it's going to outgrow its container. So at that point, you're going to need to transplant it to a larger container.
Signs of root-bound plants include slow, sickly growth and branches with excessive distance between limbs. To check for root-bound symptoms, remove the plant from its pot and examine its roots to see if they are deeply matted on the bottom and surrounding sides of the pot.
If we just take this plant here, move the container a little bit, touch the container, and then gently pull it off, we'll see that there's roots everywhere around the edge of the container. This plant is pot-bound or root-bound. These roots don't have anywhere to go.
Tiny root hairs are very delicate and may easily be destroyed by light, air, or clumsy hands.
In order to keep this plant growing quickly and give enough room for the roots, we'll transplant it into this 3-gallon container full of organic mix.
Always transplant into the same or similar type of growing medium.
Now the first thing I'm going to want to do is to open a little hole in this container. I'll open it a little bit more, and then I'll just take this very carefully and set it down in the container and backfill around it and push the soil into good, strong contact with the root system. Now I'll just give it a good watering, and I'll tell you, this is really important. You give it lots of water. Do not be afraid to overwater this plant, because you can't. Now we'll just wait for this to drain on down, and that's it. That's done. It's that easy. Do a few hundred of these, and you'll get the hang of it.
Once transplanted, cannabis requires low levels of nitrogen and potassium and increased quantities of phosphorus. Photosynthesis and chlorophyll production are slowed, as are water and nutrient absorption. Transplant late in the day so transplants will have all night to recover. Also, give transplants filtered, less intense light for a couple of days.
Fuck, man, we got a major situation here. What, the squirrels again? It's not squirrels, man. This is much bigger than fucking squirrels. Look at these little black specks. What are they? That fucking thing. What the hell is that? Fuck, you know what's going on here? What? Dope-eating insects, man. They're gonna fucking wipe out the whole crop, just like happened to me in grade 7. Remember that?
Ricky, this can't be happening, all right?
Pests, fungi, and diseases can all be prevented, but if allowed to grow unchecked, they can devastate the garden in a few short weeks. Insects, mites, and maggots slither into the grow room, eating, reproducing, and wasting weed. Fungi spores are present in the air at all times. They may be introduced by an infected plant or from air containing fungus spores. Disease attacks sick plants first. Strong plants tend to grow faster than pests and diseases can spread. Cleanliness is the key to insect and fungus prevention. The grow room should be totally enclosed so the environment can be controlled easily. Keep the floor clean. Keep all debris off soil surface. Growers and their tools often transport microscopic pests, diseases, and fungi. Disinfect tools by dipping in rubbing alcohol or washing with soap and hot water. Wash your hands before touching foliage and after handling diseased plants. Remember, it's much easier to prevent the start of a disease than it is to wipe out an infestation once it takes hold.
Let me take a look over here. Now on this plant, we can see some adult spider mites and some eggs. The juveniles or the young ones are a little more difficult to spot because they're translucent. The adults are dark in color or orangish, two-spotted, red. There's several different kinds. Normally we see the two-spotted or red spider mite. The bottom of the leaf is where they live. On the top of the leaf are the classic stipples. They're yellowish spots that the spider mites make when they rasp and suck the juices of the plant from the bottom of the leaf. And I'll have to say, this leaf is infested.
Most pest insects and mites lay thousands of eggs in a short period of time, which means an infestation can happen in a matter of days. Indoor gardeners have many options to control insects and fungi. I prefer natural organic sprays such as pyrethrum and neem, and will only use harsh chemicals as a last resort. In general, sprays should be applied soon after eggs hatch, so young adults are caught in their weakest stage of life. Any spray, no matter how benign, always seems to slow plant growth a little. Spray plants as little as possible and avoid spraying for 2 weeks before harvest. Read all labels thoroughly before use. Use only contact sprays that are approved for edible plants. Wait until cuttings are rooted and seedlings are at least a month old before spraying.
Man, books make it so much easier to understand, like really hard thinking and stuff. They make it a lot clearer. Holy fuck, man, here it is. Look at this. This guy had some sick plants, and all he did was he fucking quantratine in them. We just gotta quantratine the plants, man.
Ricky, where's that? Where did it say
Right
that?
fucking over there.
Quarantine. All right, we gotta quarantine the plants.
That's what I said.
Ricky, watch the road.
I am watching. We're cool, man.
All right, here we go. All right. We've got to find another parasite that's going to feed off these little parasites.
What does that mean? A parasite?
Oh, there's a picture of it right there. There's spider mites.
Spider mites? Oh man, that's not good, Julian.
Wow,
Those little
what do you mean?
cocksuckers, they'll kill everything, man. I heard about those
All
fucking
right,
things. They're
just a
nasty.
second. Chill out. Okay, it says here to use ladybugs. Ladybugs and spider
Ladybugs?
mites.
No way.
Watch the road, Ricky. You're fucking scaring the shit out of me here. That's it, man. Ladybugs.
Where the fuck are we gonna get some ladybugs?
I'll get some ladybugs, man. Don't worry about it.
This ladybug was released here by the grower. Whoops, there it goes. The ladybug was released here about a week ago. And what they do, they're on an endless mission looking for aphids. They'll also eat spider mites, but that's not their favorite food. They really like aphids. Let's just release a few of these things. I'll just put them down here on this plant and watch them run away. But if there's too many of them, one way to get rid of them, or one easy way to deal with them if you want to catch them and put them back, is you just vacuum them up. And you get them in your little clean little vacuum bag and put them back in the refrigerator. It doesn't hurt them at all.
Cool. Vacuum them up.
We are gathered here today under the watchful gaze of the Fury to ascertain the guilt of 2 souls in a trial by combat.
Here we have
Commissioners,
one of the
step
classic strains of all time, Panama Red. This has been a favorite of mine for years. The first time I smoked this plant was in Costa Rica, and that was, some 30 years ago. It's a classic sativa. Look at the size of this leaf. The blades are huge. This is a classic indica or afghanica leaf, however you want to look at it. But notice it's very, very broad leaf and short. Both these plants are approximately the same age. And you can see how much more robust the indica plant is than the sativa. This is going to be probably your biggest indicator of what type of plant you have. The sativas have a much fluffier, lighter bud than the indicas. The sativa can often be 20 feet tall, 4 meters or more. That's a tall plant. They've got a huge root system, and they're much more drought tolerant than the indicas. The sativa takes longer to grow. The high is more of a soaring, never-ending high. The indica, the high with it, is more of a lethargic, heavy stone, a body stone, if you will. Indica is much more dense and strong, thicker and heavier. The indicas do not grow as tall. They're short, squat, and bushy. They can take more cold than the sativa, and overall, they're just a tougher plant. And what does the beginning grower need to grow? Indicas in general are easier to grow than sativas, but it just kind of depends on the variety. What I would suggest is to use a cross between an indica and a sativa and get one that's good for beginners, such as a Northern Lights cross.
Very well. Who will stand for this woman?
Okay, well, here we are in a flowering garden, and as you can see, the plants have budded.
Cannabis flowers when the days become shorter and plants are signaled that the annual life cycle is coming to an end. This occurs naturally outdoors in the autumn, but must be regulated indoors by the grower. Ideal female plants grow squat and bushy with branches close together on the stem and dense foliage on branches. In most commonly grown strains, the first signs of female flowers appear 1 to 3 weeks after inducing flowering with a 12-hour photoperiod.
What that means is it's 12 hours of light and 12 hours of uninterrupted darkness every 24 hours. That induces flowering. The 12-hour photoperiod, or the 12-12 day-night cycle, is induced usually when the plants are approximately 1 foot tall. That would be about this tall right here, about 1 foot. This plant over here has just started to flower for about 10 days. And what you have is the beginnings of a flowering plant. The little white pistils are starting to show.
Female flowers initially appear at the top of the terminal or uppermost bud and gradually develop on lower branches. Flowers have 2 small, 1/4 to 1/2 inch fuzzy white hairs called pistils that form a V. This set of pistils is attached at the base to an ovule. It's self-contained within a light green pod called the seed bract. The entire thing is called a calyx. Pistil-packed calyxes form dense clusters or buds along stems. Buds put on much of their harvest weight as they swell during the last 2 or 3 weeks of growth. When a female is flowering at its zenith, the pistils swell in size and also change in color, most often from white to amber and eventually reddish brown.
Yeah, I fucking hate harvesting. I like planting the things and watering them, and looking after them, talking to them. I don't like fucking harvesting.
You like smoking them, don't you?
I like smoking them.
A bountiful harvest is the payoff for all the research, work, risk, and investment you put into your grow room, not to mention the long, patient wait. A well-organized harvest is essential to ensure the highest quality cannabis.
The best way to tell when one of these buds is ripe is to look at the resin glands. The resin glands tell a story.
Get a close-up look at resin glands. Use a 10-power magnifying glass, jeweler's loupe, or a 20 to 50-power handheld microscope. Resin gland development will be in one of 3 stages: clear, milky white, and amber. The best time for harvesting sativa is when THC production is peaked. but not yet started the degradation process. Seasonal flowers will mature 6 to 12 weeks after the photoperiod has been changed to 12 hours. Established indoor varieties tend to go through 4 to 5 weeks of rapid bud formation before growth levels off. Peak harvest takes place 1 to 3 weeks after growth slows. Avoid the taste of organic or chemical fertilizers in harvested buds by flushing with plain water or a clearing solution 7 to 10 days before harvesting. Do not water for a day or two before harvest. The soil should be fairly dry, but not dry enough so plants grow. This will speed drying time by a day or more and not affect the quality of the end product. And most importantly, plan in advance where you will securely dry all that bud before you cut it.
There's these guys sleeping right over there. Who they are, but let's keep an eye. So here's the deal. We're gonna harvest now. Get down here so we can see this. Because what I'm doing is I'm gonna just take these simple scissors and cut this baby at the base. It'll be a little bit hacking, but not bad, especially if I bend it and hack it. Here we go. Now, we're gonna take this bud, this beautiful bud of Love Potion number 1, over to the trimming teepee and put some nimble fingers to work.
Proper handling is the key to retaining THC potency after harvest. Prolonged exposure to light, temperatures above 80 degrees, friction from fondling hands, and damp, humid conditions should be avoided. THC exists only in the leaves, flowers, and glandular trichomes, lovingly referred to as resin glands or simply trichomes.
All right, boys. Time for the final test.
Ricky! Oh my God! There, get up! Oh my God, boys! How was it?
Ooh. Boys, that is hands down the best dope I've ever fucking smoked.
Once you cut your buds off, ain't time to nuke them and get high yet. You gotta wait. You need to dry the buds. The buds take about, well, anywhere from 5 to 15 days to dry, depending upon humidity and temperature. Humidity should be somewhere between 50 and 60%, and the temperature somewhere between 65 and 85 degrees. Now let's take this harvested female into our drying teepee where we've got a little harvest party going on.
Manicuring is easiest immediately after harvest, when leaves are still soft and supple. Trimming leaves immediately will also speed drying. Use a small pair of trimming scissors with small blades capable of accessing hard-to-reach leaf petioles and snipping them off at the stem. Manicure over a fine silk screen or glass table to collect fallen resin glands, which can be smoked immediately or pressed into blocks of hash. Budget enough time to harvest and manicure your crop, so you won't have to leave the job half finished. Properly manicuring 1 pound takes from 4 to 6 hours by hand with scissors and 1 to 2 hours when using an automatic trimmer. Beginners should plan on slightly more time until they get the hang of it.
What we need to do first is trim off these great big shade leaves. I always like to take them off right here at the base of the stem.
If you fail to remove the stem, it shrivels and dies, attracting moisture that can in turn attract mold.
Next, I'll go through and trim them on the outside. Different buds can be trimmed differently. These Afghanis are probably the easiest to trim. And then the sativas are like a lot more difficult to trim because they've got many more leaves and the buds are shaped differently. By trimming it up, we retain the bud that has the most resin, the mind-bending stuff, and get rid of the leaf, such as this one. But remember, don't throw them away because we're going to make hash with them later. But notice how I have to get in between these buds and trim that leaf right out of there. and then shake it away. And then once I trim this off and clean the bud up, then I can hang them individually, hang branches this size or larger. This bud here probably weighs 10 grams, maybe 12 grams right now. Well, when it's dry, it's going to weigh 75% less. In fact, that's the way you can tell when your plants are dry. There we go. That bud's ready to dry.
Fresh green marijuana is not very potent. After harvest, it must dry before smoking.
What we've done so far is we've cut the crop, we've harvested it, we've trimmed it up or manicured it very closely to the bud. Now we've got to hang it to dry it.
When dried relatively slowly, over 5 to 7 days, moisture evaporates evenly into the air, yielding uniformly dry buds with minimal THC decomposition.
Do not dry your dope too fast. Do not turn the fan directly on it. Do not dry it in 2 or 3 days. Let it go at least 5 to 7 days, and it will become evenly dry. That's what we're looking for, even dryness.
Inspect drying buds daily for any signs of fungus, mold, and spider mites.
What we'll do is we'll leave this hanging for the next week, maybe 10 days even, and when it's dry enough for the stems to break instead of fold like this, they'll clearly break and crack. Cut a branch off and bend it like this, and if it snaps, that means it's dry enough to start the curing process. Let's try that again. Let's see if this branch snaps out here at this level. Yes, it does.
Curing allows buds to dry sufficiently to prevent mold from growing even if they are stored for a long time. Cut stems into manageable lengths and place them in an airtight glass container. Gently pack as many buds into the container as possible without damaging them. Leave the containers in a cool, dry, dark place. Open the container for a few minutes 2 to 4 times a day to let excess moisture escape.